Meeting. Anybody in the public gallery? We'll wait a couple of seconds just. Somebody letting them know that we're
Michael's out.
Michael out there. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, any declaration of interest beyond what we have declared in the past? I will just note that the Farmers Union are up today, Ulster Farmers Union. I'm a member of the Farmers Union, so put that on record. Any others? No? Okay, apologies. We have apologies from Anya Murphy, Tom Buchanan, Nicola Brogan, and am I right, William Irwin? And William Irwin. Members, Chairperson's business. Last week we considered a strategic planning meeting, and it was suggested that we have a venue close to Lough Neagh. The Clark's team has sourced Clotworthy House, which sits on Lough Neagh shore and is owned by Antrim Borough Council. I'm assuming that's Mid and East Antrim Council now, would it? Or Antrim and Newtown Abbey, sorry.
No better place to go, Chair. No better place to go.
And as part of Antrim Castle Gardens estate, they can accommodate us on Thursday the 25th of April. Are you content that we make plans to go there?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Members, I have received correspondence from NICFA, the membership and representative umbrella body for voluntary and community sector in Northern Ireland. They have requested to brief the committee. Are you agreed that we list them for further briefings? Okay, great. We have also received correspondence from Regen inviting the committee to visit their Regen waste plant at Newry. It's a family-owned business with almost 400 staff. It is invested in 10 optical sorters to ensure that they have state-of-the-art plant and that allows the sorting of over 200,000 tonnes of material each year. Are you content that we put them in for a list of potential visits? Content? Thank you. Members, draft minutes are in your pack of the 14th of March, pages 6 to 17. Have you any comment? Can we have agreement that we sign and publish these? Great, thank you. Matters arising. We have a number of matters arising from my perspective. Last week, the Public Finance Scrutiny Unit gave us a brief, and those briefings are at pages 18 to 135 of your pack. That is the slides that they showed us last week, and that is the Module 1 and Module 2. Content to note? Correspondence of the 19th of March in your table of papers 4 to 5 in response to a letter dated the 1st of March seeking further information on the regulations that lay outside the Assembly's democratic scrutiny. The query regarding the non-commercial movement of pet birds was raised by the House of Lords Subcommittee and not as a result of amendments to the EU legislation. DAERA confirms there are no changes to the existing EU law. Second issue we raised was in regards to the letter of the House of Lords Subcommittee received from the Ulster Farmers Union about the ending in February 2024 of the derogation allowing 95% organic feed for all ages of birds. DAERA have highlighted that organics is a reserved matter, but the Minister confirms that this particular derogation has been extended until the 23rd of February 2025. DEFRA is in the Northern Ireland Competent Authority for implementation of this EU regulation. The Department works closely with them and is aware of the issues facing the Northern Ireland organic poultry sector. Declan, did you want in on this? Or was there another?
Chair, it's a separate matters rising.
Oh, matters rising, that's okay, thank you. So on these particular issues, are you happy to note? Okay. We also queried a more general matter of scrutiny of and the input of these matters, and the Department highlights that opportunity to input to EU legislation in development exists through the public consultation stage via the European Commission of Have Your Say portal, and gives all stakeholders an opportunity to input to EU legislation going through the EU institutions. So again, members, if I could remind you just if you see anything of interest coming up on EU issues, maybe you'd bring it to our attention, just so that at an early stage that we can maybe have our say on that. Refer you to correspondence dated the 19th of March in your table packs of pages 6 to 7 in response to a letter dated the 8th of March requesting further information on the Just Transition funding and if the budget will be from the ring-fenced farm support measures funding. Minister has stated that in terms of the Just Transition Fund for Agriculture, the Act requires that it be established to support the sector in delivering its contribution under policies and proposals within the Climate Action Plan. The fund will be addressed at the forthcoming consultation on the Climate Change Action Plan, and funding for it will need to be considered in the context of budgetary pressures and priorities across Northern Ireland Executive. So it's really not telling us where that budget is going to come from, in fairness. I suppose my concern on that was that it would come from our ring-fenced support finance from the GB or UK government, but we don't know that yet. I was hoping there would be a separate pot. Any comment on that? No. Refer you to table papers on page 8 regarding the letter from the Department regarding the regulations for the Farming for Generations scheme, which was discussed at committee. During discussion on the regulations, the dear official was asked by a member for the cost of the pilot scheme. Cost of the pilot farming for the Generations scheme is approximately 1.5 million. However, the incorrect figure of 150,000 relating to an element of the scheme was inadvertently provided by the official of the committee. Letter therefore notifies the committee of this error and corrects the record. Happy to note. Okay, agenda item 4A, which is statutory rules and the Examiner of Statutory Rules, 5th report. We have a late SL1 to consider, and the Department thanks us for accepting it yesterday in advance of the Easter recess. It's in your table papers at pages 15 to 36 regarding the SL1, the packaging waste data reporting number 2 amendment regulations, which will be subject to negative resolution. Regulations are expected to be in place to close loopholes in data reporting until revoked and replaced by the producer responsibility obligations. Packaging and packaging waste regulations in 2024. The extended producer responsibility, that is the EPR, for packaging is planned to be introduced into the UK in October 2024. This will require producers to take responsibility for the packaging they place on the market by obligating them to pay for the collection and disposal cost of this packaging when it becomes waste. Any questions on that, members? It's just an SL1. If not, I will put the question that the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has considered the SL1, the packaging waste data reporting number 2 amendment regulations, and has no objection to the rule being made. Are you all content?
Content.
Thank you. Secondly, there is a draft SR, the Period Products Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, Specified Public Service Bodies Regulations Northern Ireland 2024, which will be subject to the draft affirmative procedure and shall not come into operation unless and until it is affirmed by resolution in the Assembly, which is scheduled for the plenary meeting on the 9th of April. I refer you to the 5th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules in your table of paper starting page 42. The report includes the draft SR 2024-31 and the Examiner of Statutory Rules does not draw special attention to it. Are you content of the ESR's 5th report?
Yep.
Great, thank you. The SL1 was considered by the committee at our meeting on the 7th of March and the committee was content for the draft SR to be made. So are you content to note the draft SR? Thank you. Okay, members, into our first briefing here, so you're all very welcome. And I would welcome representatives from the Northern Ireland Environment Link, Malachi Campbell, Dr. Jonathan Bell, Mr. Jerry Darby, and Ms. Patricia Wallace. So you're all very welcome. So you've 10 minutes of a presentation, and hopefully there will be a number of questions then, which I assume you will be happy to take. So I don't know who's leading off.
Yeah, very much so, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just start by introducing myself and my colleagues. I'm Malky Campbell, the Senior Policy Officer for Northern Ireland Environment Link, or NEIL as we will probably be referred to often. And just to say, on behalf of NEIL, I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to present to you all today. I'm joined today by, on my left, Dr. Jonathan Bale. He is the head of, Head of Land and Sea Policy at RSPB Northern Ireland and Chair of NEIL's Sustainable Agricultural Policy Working Group. On my right is Jerry Darby, the Lough Neagh Partnership Manager, and also joined by Patricia Wallace, the Northern Ireland Manager and UK Executive Team Member of Social Farms and Gardens. If I can, Chair, I'd just like to briefly give you a little introduction to NEIL, Northern Environment Link, in case you're not familiar with it. NEIL is the networking and forum body for non-statutory organisations concerned with the natural and built environment of Northern Ireland. NEIL's 69 full members represent 190,000 individuals, manage the 262 subsidiary groups, have an annual turnover of £70 million and manage over 314,000 acres of land. NEIL works closely with its sister links in England, Scotland and Wales and the Irish Environment Network in the Republic of Ireland. NEIL has a number of issue-based working groups or coalitions in which NEIL members and non-members collaborate. At present, NEIL's working groups include the Climate Coalition Northern Ireland, CCNI, the Freshwater Task Force, Landscapes NI, which deals with designated sites, the Northern Ireland Marine Task Force, the Nature and Environmental Protection Working Group, which deals mainly with biodiversity-related issues, and the Sustainable Agriculture Policy Group. Other issue-specific working groups and subgroups have been and may be established as appropriate in response to the wishes of NEIL members. As outlined in our written briefing, NEIL's priorities for the sector fall into 4 categories. These are strategies and co-designing of policy, environmental governance, legislation and funding. We will deal with these in order. Firstly, in relation to strategies and co-designing of policy, it's a statement of the obvious that while the Assembly was suspended, a number of important environmental strategies and policies were delayed and some legal obligations were not met. For example, a new environment strategy, which also will act as Northern Ireland's first Environmental Improvement Plan, or EIP, was due to have been laid before the Assembly by the 25th of July 2023, but has still not been published. The 4-yearly review of the Nutrients Action Programme, or NAP, was due on the 11th of October 23, but was not published, even as the calls for action to deal with the explosion of blue-green algal blooms in the summer of 2023 were being made. Publishing these 2 strategies should be a priority for DAERA, not just because of the scale of the problems, but because the legal deadline for publishing these was missed. Other overdue strategies for which DAERA is responsible include the biodiversity strategy, as the last one covered the period up to 2020, the Northern Ireland Marine Plan, which was consulted on in 2018, but which has not yet been published, a food strategy, which was due to have been published in 2022, and a waste management strategy, as the last one ended in 2020. This is not an exhaustive list, but is meant to illustrate some of the actions needed to meet existing obligations now that an executive is back in place. A key principle for NEIL is that DAERA should commit to working with representatives from the environment sector to co-design environmental laws, policies and strategies. And that should start with a long-term strategic plan to tackle the freshwater pollution that blighted Lough Neagh and other freshwater bodies in the summer of 2023. DAERA should also publish a climate action plan as required by Section 51 and establish a Just Transition Commission as required by Section 37 of the Climate Change Northern Ireland Act 2022. Turning to environmental governance, NEIL believes that establishing an independent Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, should be a top priority for DAERA. The Assembly motion in February 2020 that declared a climate emergency and biodiversity crisis called upon the Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to, quote, to begin immediately work to establish an independent environmental protection agency based on models of best practice that will be appointed within 12 months. The establishment of an independent EPA was also committed to in New Decade, New Approach, where it states that further to bringing forward a Climate Change Act, which we have, quote, the Executive will establish an independent environmental protection agency. Neil welcomes the Minister's recent statement of his intention to establish a review of environmental governance in Northern Ireland, and we hope to see progress on that in the near future. And Neil will be happy to contribute to any discussion and consultation in relation to that question. As regards governance, I will only explore this very briefly, but the illegal dumping of waste at the Moboy site in the northwest is a very clear example of the failings of the current environmental enforcement, monitoring and regulatory system. More than 1 million tonnes of waste were illegally dumped at Moboy, which is close to the River Fahan, which supplies 60% of Derry's drinking water and is a special area of conservation because it is an internationally important river for Atlantic salmon. The Moboy site has been described by journalists Dan Ashby and Lucy Taylor on BBC Radio 4's series Buried as, quote, one of the biggest environment crimes in UK history. Ensuring the appropriate funding of bodies with regulatory responsibilities so they can fulfil their statutory duties is another key component of good governance, and I will return to that point regarding funding later. Achieving good environmental governance is needed on the land and in the sea, and is not just the responsibility of DAERA, but will require cross-departmental and executive support and cooperation. For example, Section 50 of the Climate Change Act Northern Ireland 2022 requires the Executive Office to establish an independent office to be known as the Northern Ireland Climate Commissioner. The functions of the Commissioner are to oversee and report on the operations of the Act, and that will be an essential component of Northern Ireland's journey towards meeting the targets of that Act and of its journey to badly needed improvements in environmental governance. As regards legislation, DAERA needs to ensure it meets all of its existing legal obligations. For example, it should ensure the full and timely implementation of the Climate Change Act Northern Ireland 2022, and that there is an urgent action on overdue commitments such as publishing the Climate Action Plan. Neil was disappointed that the ERA Minister confirmed that the Climate Action Plan will not now be published by the deadline of 6th of June 2024, but we recognise the challenges that have led to this delay and welcome the Minister's commitment to the Act. DAERA should also prioritise publishing a new Agriculture Act based on the principle of public money for public goods, which will ensure the new agricultural policy proposals to support nature-friendly farming are developed and implemented. And finally, in relation to funding, the importance of appropriate funding for DAERA and NIEA and all environmental and agricultural policies in action is a recurring issue for Neil members, as funding cuts are having an impact on their operations and on the management and protection of our environment. Funding is also a huge issue for the environmental NGO sector, and we wish to see greater, more reliable, long-term funding for the sector. DAERA should ensure that those bodies with responsibility for environmental monitoring and regulation, including the Office for Environmental Protection, the OEP, and NIEA are properly funded in the long term. In our marine environment, there is a need for increased long-term resourcing and funding for marine protection and restoration, including the release of maritime fisheries funding. And of course, all strategies should have an accompanying funding strategy to ensure delivery of commitments. I will now hand over to Jonathan Bell to give a 2-minute overview of the agricultural and marine conservation priorities for the sector.
Thank you, Malachy, and good morning, Chair and members. It's great to be back up here again with you all. As Malachy touched upon, there's 2 key priorities there that I just want to give a little bit more detail around, and the first is the need to expand and speed up the rollout of the Farming with Nature scheme. As you know, we are in a transition phase, with DAERA developing a new agricultural policy framework to replace the CAP. It is critical that there's a smooth transition created between the old and the new schemes to provide reassurance for farming families at this time of uncertainty. And unfortunately, evidence to date suggests this transition is not as smooth as we would have hoped. So the development of the new Farming with Nature package, which will replace existing agri-environment schemes, has been slow. DAERA should urgently prioritise resource to co-design the development of the Farming with Nature package with stakeholders. In the meantime, our concern is that DAERA have discontinued parts of the existing agri-environment, namely the environmental farming scheme wider, and this has created a cliff edge for farming families, with the full rollout of Farming with Nature not expected until 2026 at the earliest. So farming families are set to miss out on this vital income, and DAERA should urgently provide an interim option for these farmers to bridge the gap until the replacement Farming with Nature scheme is up and running. And in terms of the broader agriculture policy framework, currently the vast majority of agricultural budget goes to basic payments, with only about 1 or 2% of the agri budget being spent on agri-environment. And under the new policy framework, DAERA have given a vague commitment that over time money should move away from basic payments and go into other schemes such as Farming with Nature. And we believe that Farming with Nature package should become the central pillar of the agricultural budget by 2030, and we want a clear timeline and clarity around how much money will move into these schemes throughout the course of the transition period. All farms in receipt of public money should also be required to undertake biodiversity audits alongside the carbon audits that are happening to measure and monitor biodiversity and develop on-farm biodiversity plans. And the second area I want to touch upon briefly is around strategic land use. We are placing increasing demands on our limited land resource, with pressures to sequester more carbon, plant more trees, restore peatland, grow food, produce energy, provide housing. And in this context, government should finally deliver on the long-standing calls for a land use strategy or framework for Northern Ireland. A land use strategy and framework should include a set of principles for guiding future land use decisions to ensure our multifunctional land resource can deliver a number of outcomes across a wide range of government strategies and policies. And just lastly, if I may, RSPB and the Ulster Wildlife jointly host the Northern Ireland Marine Task Force, a coalition of NGOs working to deliver more productive, resilient and healthy seas. And from a marine perspective, it is vital we develop a robust policy framework for marine protection. There are several important policies that have been in the pipeline now for some time that need urgently prioritised, including the Northern Ireland Marine Plan, the MPA Strategy Review, the Blue Carbon Action Plan, Seabird Conservation Strategy and the Elasmo Branch Strategy. All these strategies will be essential for ensuring marine species and habitats in NI are conserved, restored to maintain healthy and functioning and thriving marine ecosystems, and such policies need to be underpinned by legally binding SMART targets and be supported by a firm commitment to funding to address the significant declines in species and habitats. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. With your permission, Chair, I will just hand over now to Patricia Wallace to give a 2-minute overview on the sector's perspective on sustainability, food and community engagement issues.
Good morning, good to be here as well. Social Farms and Gardens provides the infrastructure support for all community food growing projects of all different sizes and shapes. These are so important because they connect people with soil, nature and food production, and a lot of innovation happens, as we know, on the edges of our systems. I'm here this morning for 2 reasons, I think. We were involved in writing the framework and action plan for Belfast City Council for their sustainable food places. And when we did that, we were privileged in that we got an overview of the food web, if you like, which mirrored the work of the department. Joy Alexander is the draft food framework. Much of it overlapped with that work, and it would just be such a step forward now to publish that draft food strategy. It's a global system, as you know, and it needs to change the food system. And the only way that we are going to do this successfully in Northern Ireland is build relationships across the whole sector. And I think Belfast City Council, in their food partnership, has begun this work, and it's a good demonstration model of how to do it, because we need the farmers and their enthusiasm, energy and experience. We need the environmental sector. We need the NGOs where innovation is taking place in small scale production. But that has all got to be magnified for us to come together and solve a very complex problem. Often complex, large problems are solved in small, distributed networks. And we've got to find a way, and this committee is the working of it, of the agriculture and environment sector working and pulling together. Northern Ireland has to be nimble. So that was our work on the food strategy. Lots of relationship building, lots of collaboration, listening to everybody. We also have done some primary research on the amount of land that should be set aside for community growing. And I have a copy for each member today. This is it. It was an 18-month piece of work of co-design across all 11 councils in Northern Ireland. It was quite painstaking, but we got there. And the main recommendation is for 1/3 of an acre per 1,000 households. So in this, if you read it, you will see Claudy, Castle Caulfield, Cumber, all across Northern Ireland, examples where people are growing local food. Now, it's small scale, and you're responsible for our agriculture industry, but if people understand seasonality of food, if they understand it's not an easy thing to grow these crops, they do feel there is failure and you have to persevere. But if people understand and appreciate local food, that is a very important, because that is your citizen, that is your consumer who's going to buy our local products. And one thing that was a commonality across all the sectors was everybody desired local food on local plates. So you don't find that out until you bring everybody to the table. And I think that is a really good place to start. So we would like the department to support the councils as they try to adopt the recommendations within this. That's giving over those bits of disused spare land that communities want to put to productive use. In Cumber, you've got the brilliant Alberto in the council's recycling depot, the old depot there. He's a brilliant seed saver. He is just a shining example of regenerative growing. And these are the examples that I think will help the whole sector to look at how we change and how we transition to a more agroecological food system. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. And finally, with the Chair's permission, I'm just going to hand over now to Jerry Darby to give a 2-minute overview of the Landscapes Northern Ireland perspective and some initial comments on Lough Neagh on behalf of the sector.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today and for giving me the opportunity with Neil. As some of you may know, for previous discussions, I'm the manager of the Lough Neagh Partnership, which is a stakeholder body representing different interests, community, sand traders, farmers, landowners around the shores of the lough. Before I touch on Lough Neagh itself and the particular problems, I just want to emphasise that Lough Neagh is really just one of a mosaic and collection of beautiful, very, very important designated landscapes that we have around the lough. So, you know, off the top of my head, I know, Michelle, you're down in Strangford there, and again, one of the most beautiful places to go down to, next to Lough Erne as well, in terms of Tom and other colleagues as well. Declan's up in the Sperrins there, and I lived there for 20 years, so I know the beauty and the wildness of that place, and John and Patsy are down the lough. And I really just want to try and get the committee to possibly take on and try and persuade and any dealings with the Minister to try and really look at a cultural shift in terms of the resourcing of bodies that try to manage those landscapes. Very, very important landscapes. I'm going to say a cultural shift, I mean a cultural shift in terms of investment going more to on-the-ground conservation, on-the-ground management within these landscapes, vis-a-vis, you know, sometimes pre-COVID, I used to go into NIEA offices and there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And I used to look around and go, you know, I'm not saying that they weren't doing something valuable, but what I am saying is I'd like the committee to realise and try and prioritise with the Minister the importance of boots on the ground, of actually doing conservation work with and particularly with farmers. And I'll come to that. In terms of Lough Neagh and in terms of them wider landscapes, Lough Neagh has suffered serious loss of species and also habitats as well. Habitats, particularly wet woodland and wet grassland, and that is linked to farming sector, if I'm honest with you, and it's also linked to the peatland extraction sector as well. I'll give you two examples. So there used to be thousands, and you'll know, Tom, in terms down in Lough Erne as well, thousands of curlew birds in Northern Ireland. The last sort of sanctuary of them probably is work with our SPB down in Lough Erne. And in Lough Neagh, that's how much we have. There it is. 7 breeding pairs of curlew. 14 birds in a shoreline of 100 mile. That's here to Dublin. So that's an indicator of just the loss that has happened to the species. There's 100,000 birds have been lost in terms of birds that fly into the loch. Now, there's an argument, a lot of that's to do with climate change, but it's climate change and mixed to land use and farming land use as well. Of no doubt, there's a link to that. Regarding the elephant in the living room, or the big whale sitting in the middle of Lough Neagh, is the issue of water quality. And without doubt, this is the fundamental issue that has to be grasped. We all know the causes. We've all got presentations done to all the MLAs and to all the variety of NGOs in terms of, we know in Northern Ireland 62% of nutrient overloads was mainly P. Phosphate, soluble phosphate is the real bad boy. That's coming from the farming sector in terms of slurry and associated nutrients. 24% is coming from the 3NI water, and that's after it's been processed. And 12% is septic tanks as well. So we're all responsible for it. And what I want to emphasise, we're not here to bash farmers, because farmers to a certain degree are actually following farming policy. All of us are contributing in terms of our own actions and in terms of the waste that we all produced. And that has to be addressed, and there's been a variety of ways of doing that, and we can discuss that later on in terms of what's the best way of taking that forward. Lastly, I just staying on Lough Neagh, there needs to be an integrated approach, and we have said this numerous times. I've said it to yourself, Michelle, and Patsy and John when I've met you on Acton as well, in terms of actually, the problems of water quality and the problems of the loss of habitats on Lough Neagh cannot be solved unless there's different departments at first speaking to one another, and then there's some sort of structure with some sort of legislation associated with that. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. That concludes our overview of the sector's priorities. Just like to thank the committee for your attention, and we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you all for your presentations and for providing that overview. I'm sure there'll be some members from questions, but initially just a couple from myself. You mentioned Moboy regarding the issues there. What difference would an Environmental Protection Agency have made? Because I see you did mention that specifically around Moboy. So how would that have changed things?
Very difficult question to answer, Chair, because you're taking a hypothetical situation of what may have happened. I think what I was trying...
you raised it in your presentation.
Yes, but I think it is fair to say that in relation to Moboy, it's an illustration of the failings of the monitoring and regulation processes and structures thus far. And part of the reason that we're advocating, and the sector is advocating for an independent environmental protection agency, is if you change the structures, hopefully those same problems that are mostly structural will not then reoccur.
Okay, by what means? Sorry for delving into this, but and I'm not saying I'm pro or anti Environmental Protection Agency. I want to get the right process.
Yes.
Because obviously what was there hasn't worked.
Yes.
And I heard the issue, and I'll come to it later, about Lough Neagh, about the Environmental Protection Agency and Independent Environmental Protection Agency. Well, they have that in England, but there's still blue-green algae in the Lake District, in the lakes there. So it hasn't helped or resolved it there. So what I'm seeing is a number of bodies, but we're still not getting any better processes. So I want to find something that will be a better process and stop those issues from happening. So I'm trying to, you raised the issue of the Environmental Protection Agency probably trying to or may have resolved the issue before it started of Mobile. So I'm trying to find out how that would have been done with an Environmental Protection Agency, or could it have been done through the processes that we have? Was there a failure there through the processes that we have that could have stopped that?
I would agree with you, Chair, actually, in relation to processes. I mean, I think that's part of the key of this issue, and I think there's no doubt that Mobile will be the result of failures of the system and of the structures. Because it is in some ways a hypothetical question in terms of like what would have happened if we had an independent EPA, that's really difficult to answer. I think the important point I want to get across is the structures. As far as I understand it, in terms of Mobile, there were issues in terms of when there were inspections of the site, the communication of the findings and who was actually taking responsibility to live up to the responsibilities that they had, because there are responsibilities in terms of planning, in terms of pollution inspectorate, in terms of local council and so on. So there are a number of different bodies who have a range of responsibilities. And I think there was, I would suggest that there was poor communication and ineffective administration of those responsibilities between those different groups. The point about an independent EPA is that it is independent of government. At the moment, NIEA basically, as well as the OEP, but NIEA does a lot of sort of like that regulatory sort of like functions. NIEA is a part of DERA, which is a part of the government. So basically the system at present is that a section of government is responsible for monitoring and evaluating the performance of other parts of government. So I think if you ask government to inspect government, they'll probably find the government is doing very well. If you had a completely independent body with a different ethos that was properly funded, I think it might come up with more rigorous and robust findings. And you mentioned the situation in England where it has the Environment Agency, for example. There have been criticisms for many years that the Environment Agency has not been adequately funded. And in fact, the funding for that body has been cut over recent years. And we've heard similar things here in terms of people who are responsible for inspecting freshwater pollution incidents here in Northern Ireland. So you can set up any system, but if you don't properly fund it and run it, it's not going to be as successful as it should be. So, any system can also be run badly. So I think the key thing here is the independence of a government, because in theory, if we had a policy that, let's say, for example, was not fully in line with either the law or government policy, I think it's unlikely a branch of government will go to another branch of government and say, you should be doing more.
Of course, we have the Office of Environmental Protection now, who oversee government policies and laws and regulations. So obviously that is an independent body outside of government that are a watchdog. So do you feel that will be appropriate? Will that do enough to...
Well, I'm conscious that you will have the OEP giving evidence to you after ourselves, so I would be reluctant to stray onto
Why not? Be a good time to hear your view on it.
Well, I will, but I'm just saying I would be reluctant to stray too far onto their territory, because I'm sure they can speak for themselves. What I would say is that so far it seems that the OEP are doing quite a good job. And we have seen, for example, in relation to ammonia, that the department has officially changed its position on its advice in relation to ammonia. And that was, I think, a result of the questions being asked and the scrutiny that was placed on the department by the OEP. As far as I understand it, and I think again the OEP are best placed to answer this question, the department is currently under investigation at the moment in relation to the designation of special protection areas for birds. So, the OEP, I think, is making a difference, and I think it's welcome, and I think we needed that structure. As far as I understand it, though, the OEP is limited in terms of the legal powers that it has. For example, I believe it would not be able to take another government department to court or to necessarily stop the actions of a government department. It can offer advice. And that is something I think that would be a very useful thing to have.
Malachy, you don't believe the OEP can take a government department to court?
That's my understanding of the situation.
Well, we'll check that but that's an interesting one because that's not my understanding, so that's
I think
interesting.
it's important to say that the OEP and an EPA, for example, or an independent EPA would have distinct but complementary functions. So while the OEP might hold government to account on its legal duties and responsibilities, there's no one there within IEA, but an independent EPA would hold businesses and individuals to account on upholding environmental standards. So they are complementary but distinct in terms of their functions.
Surely an IEA do that at the moment.
They do, but as Malachy has touched upon, there's been serious environmental governance flaws recorded over the last number of decades in Northern Ireland, which is going to cost the taxpayer, huge amounts of money to clean up and address. So by bringing that independence, i.e. those who make the policy separated from those who enforce it and regulate it, and there is a chance of better, more improved environmental governance.
Okay,
Sorry.
thanks. Getting back to Moboy
Yes.
specifically, be interesting to hear from yourselves where that went wrong and who didn't carry out the responsibility, because my understanding is there are laws there that should have been or could have dealt with the issues as it was happening. Why did that not happen and where were the failures there?
If I can just quickly also add, again, this is going to be checked with the OEP, but my understanding is they are not in a position where they can impose fines on any government department for not following the law or following policy, and that's another consideration that's important. And to be honest, Chair, I don't feel that I'm best placed to get into the detail of who didn't do what, when and why in relation to Moboy, because I'm not that familiar with all the details. We wanted to put that forward to you as probably one of the clearest examples of failings of the current system.
Yeah, but sorry, Malachy, there is a gap in your argument then. If you put it forward to us as an argument as to how it could be done better, but you can't tell us where it went wrong at this stage. So obviously, if you're saying you can't tell us where it went wrong, but you're suggesting a better way of doing it, then there's a gap, if you see what I mean. I'm trying to be practical here to try and find practical solutions.
Absolutely. In part, I'm trying to be honest with you in terms of I do not know the details. I know that the Mills review that was previously done by the department is a very long report, exams it goes into probably over 100 pages, and they would probably be better placed to say perhaps what went wrong at what stages. Not being involved in it, I cannot say. But it's just a matter of there are obvious failings there. And
You can't tell us what they are.
I'm not familiar with all the details.
Can I have
Sorry,
a go,
Jerry.
Tom? I think it goes back to the issue, what I was talking about earlier on about a centralised environmental department and a localised on the landscape, foots on the ground, eyes on the ground, seeing what's happening. Now the reality is somebody dug a big massive hole in the ground and nobody from government was able to see that, while that was filled in with all the mess and waste of the day. And I go, if you're asking the question, that's a cultural issue, i.e. there's no localised ownership of,
Sorry, Jerry,
of the
it may be a
of the
cultural
landscape.
issue, but there is an issue from me as to who failed to stop that. Because obviously my understanding is...
I'm agreeing with
There's
you.
unauthorised quarrying activity
agree with you.
happening across Northern Ireland. I think that's at the crux of the issue. Add in the additional criminality aspect around the disposal and illegal disposal of landfill material, and that's the crux of the issue. But the unauthorised quarrying activity that was going on for years and probably still is ongoing in certain parts of Northern Ireland, and that speaks to the need for enforcement. To enforce against where planning breaches are taking
I'm
place.
assuming there are laws there to enforce that, to stop it. But they
You can have all
didn't
the
happen.
laws of the day, but if you're not
Sorry?
seeing it, you can have all the laws of the day, but if you're not if it's not, if the department is not there on the ground to monitor it, and I'm agreeing with you, you're maybe picking me up wrong. I think the department did fail there, in the sense that it wasn't on the ground, seeing what was happening on the ground. So I'm agreeing with you to a certain
Even though
degree.
I'm told it was reported on several occasions.
Well, as I say, I don't know the issues, but in terms of the
I think
detail
that-
of it.
sorry.
But my understanding is that is not a Moy issue, but an issue in general in terms
No,
of.
but
the
I'm talking
management.
about Moboy because I'm trying to refine it. If it's happening in Moboy, it could be happening in other places. I take your point on that. But Moboy is a good example of where there is obvious failures. And we need to find out where those failures were before we try to redress them with other measures. That's all I'm saying.
Potentially,
And-
Chair, the best people to ask that question of would be the department, and then
department,
those are the people
Mills
who
report.
were due to inspect, monitor, and regulate that site. So I think they are by far and away much better placed than we would be to
Yeah,
answer those
I'm merely
specifics.
asking them because you put it on the agenda here. You put it in your briefing.
Yes, well, we think it's
So,
an example of
so
where there
obviously
were
I'm trying
failings
to
in the
get from
system.
you where you think the failures were. Because I have my own ideas, but I wanted to hear from you as well because it was you put it on the agenda here.
Yeah, just,
Okay.
can I just say on a wider issue in terms of policing, you can make that argument. You can make an argument. Well, why do you need a police service? There has to be, and it's better if the state and a police force has a degree of separation in terms of better justice and in terms of better accountability. And I do think that some sort of separation, and to get away from my boy and the details of that, just the political, the governance and political issue is that I think having some sort of separation, an independent body, it mightn't be perfect, but it will be better in terms of delivering accountability to both government and that's, there's bad people putting in waste, so bringing people who break the law to justice. So I think there'll be better justice by an
Yeah,
independent.
that's a view,
protection
Jerry.
agency.
That's a view and an opinion. I'm not saying I'm arguing against it. I'm merely trying to see where it went wrong so that if there is something different, that it can be made better. So, apologies for that, but I do want to get... Yeah, sorry, Declan.
Thank you for a very interesting and wide-ranging presentation as well. As we all know, environmental and biodiversity issues, they don't know any boundaries or borders as such, and you did make reference to dealing with your counterparts down south. And I suppose many of the issues we've been talking about to date so far, like the Boy and Loughney and others, these are these are island-wide, they're cross-border. So I just wonder from yourselves, is there better scope for island-wide cooperation on environmental and biodiversity issues, in terms of looking at an island-wide strategy or oversight?
Thank you for your question, Declan. I think I did mention at the start that as well as our sister link organisations in GB, Neil also works closely with the Irish Environment Network. And in fact, recently we published this document called Linking the Irish Environment, which addressed those specific issues. So I suppose, Declan, the short answer to your question is yes, of course. We've got a number of international river basins, and as part of the Water Framework Directive, Ireland is seen as one biogeographical region. So, it makes sense, and actually under the regulations of that directive, we would be compelled to act on an all-island basis. As you say, pollution respects no borders, same with biodiversity, migratory species and so on. So absolutely, it makes sense to work on these things on an all-island basis and cooperate, absolutely.
Just to add to that, at RSPB we work closely with our partners Birdwatch Ireland and also BirdLife Europe on a European capacity. Within our Sustainable Agriculture Policy Working Group, we are looking at results-based schemes that are being piloted in the south, and we're also looking at some of the eco schemes, European eco schemes that are being piloted in the south as well, for learnings in terms of how we develop our agriculture policy here. Also, the sector's working quite hard at the minute on Peace Plus applications, which obviously is a cross-border thing, and obviously there's a biodiversity and a marine component to that, so that would hopefully, if funding comes through, fund some large-scale nature restoration projects across the island, which would be really beneficial.
And just last wee point, Chair, if you don't mind, you made the call to significantly enhance and revise the environment strategy. You know, what precise changes would you like to see made?
I feel potentially I may not have time, Chair, to address all of the issues within that. So
Pick your top favourite.
I'd have to pick. Yes. I think one of the main shortcomings of the draft environment strategy was the lack of ambitious interim and long-term SMART targets. It was seriously lacking in that. For example, I can also just say that there were a number of targets in the draft environment strategy that were not just vague and weak, but actually represented a lowering of the ambitions of previous commitments. There are two examples I'd like to just offer you. The first is on page 24 of the draft strategy, and it said that there should be 70% of Northern Ireland's water bodies should achieve good environmental status by 2027. And that's rather than the target of 100% of our water bodies achieving good environmental status, which was initially meant to have been achieved by 2015 and subsequently 2021. So even though we've already missed the target that is in the draft environment strategy is a failure because it is lower than what we are already have meant to have achieved. The second example is, it's on page 47 of the strategy, and it is to have 75% of 150,000 hectares of protected sites in favourable condition. Now, there is no date for that target to be achieved, but the interesting thing is that there was a previous target which was for 95% of the features of ASSIs to be in or approaching favourable conservation condition by 2016. So we've gone from 95% by 2016 to 75% at an unspecified date. That is a weakening of the target. And finally, just to say, in terms of, again, the draft strategy, one example in the outcome for what they call strategic environmental outcome 1 is cleaner air in Northern Ireland. Now, nobody's going to argue against that. I think we all want that, and there are major health implications for air pollution, particularly PM2.5 and PM10. So that's a good thing. It is the lack of detail that is the issue. I mean, we already have existing legal commitments and targets which were not referred to in the draft environment strategy. So the fact that it does not even commit to meeting the targets that already existed is a major weakness. So I'd be very happy to provide more detail if the committee is interested, but a serious and concerning lack of SMART targets is a major thing.
And just to add to that, I think a really important piece around this and around the whole sort of strategy and policy framework is going to be the coherence between different policies and strategies that are in development. You know, the biodiversity strategy, the peatland strategy, the environmental improvement plan. We will not achieve any of those targets or actions if we don't fundamentally, say, reform agriculture policy. So we need integration between all the policies. They need to speak to one another and they need to be complementary, and I think that's critically important. And I really welcome the piece of work that the OEP is doing to analyse the coherence between the draft strategies that are in development.
If I could just add, sorry.
I've heard so much in the last 15 minutes about strategies.
Yeah.
There seems to be scores of them.
Yeah.
Is it not possible to have one overarching strategy that can include the parts that the specific parts that each of those would involve? Because if at least you have one, you can build all the others into it or around it.
Yeah, I think that's essentially what the environmental improvement plan tries to do, to collate that into one place, and whatever targets you have in the peatland strategy should be reflected in that overarching environmental improvement plan. So we do need to have that hierarchy, and whether the peatland strategy then actually becomes an action plan for delivery as opposed to more sort of endless paragraphs about strategy and policy, but actually delivery and what are we going to do by when.
I think that's a very good point.
Exactly.
Sorry, Malachy.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. I was just going to say, I think that's a very good point, and I think that also relates to some of the criticisms we would make of the draft environmental strategy, because it's meant to be, like, it's not meant to do everything, admittedly, but it is meant to be an overarching view of, like, all the things that need to be done, and it falls very far short of that. So, yes, I mean, what we've mentioned are some of the strategies that are overdue because commitments have already been made to do these things and they haven't been done yet. So, but one of the points we are making as a sector is the need for integration and cooperation. So your point is well made. And again, if I can just say briefly, I'm not wishing to impose on the territory of the OEP, but our criticisms of the draft environment strategy were, I would say, very much reflected by the OEP in a series of letters to the department, and in amongst other things the OEP said, and this is a quote, they advised that the strategy could be strengthened, including through prioritising, rebalancing and setting out greater clarity in respect of targets, accountability and evaluation. So, the official body who's looking at government policy has, in a very polite manner, also said the environment strategy has a number of areas in which it needs to do much better.
Yeah. I think we could all say that probably without. Declan, are you finished?
Yes, I'm
Thank
finished.
you. Hey, Patsy was next, and then John.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thank you for your presentations. Just on that very point about the read across of various policies, like you look at the Independent Environmental Protection Agency. The one thing I would say about that is independence is grand, but without powers or resources, it's just another body sitting up there with, limitations on it. So I'm sure you would want to re-emphasise that point about the adequately resourced and with adequate powers to deal with the offenders that we see, whether they're government or individuals. Now, I wanted to expand on a few things. You touched upon now these are all in one way or another interlinked. The role and function of Just Transition Committee and what its rollout should be and what its priorities should be, indeed how you see its responsibilities and duties, because as I see them, especially you mentioned there the new Agricultural Act or a new Agricultural Act, and the one thing I drew from it was nature friendly farming. I'm sure it's more than that, although that's very important in itself, and that leads on to the whole biodiversity, sustainability issues, and how farmers, as part of the obligations too on the Climate Change Act, can be farmers and landowners could be incentivised, encouraged, and educated into adopting those practices. But there's if you like a read across right across all of those various elements that you've just missed, and I wouldn't like to see any of them, as you said, Chair, been siloed. That's the last thing we want to see. So you can maybe come back to those individually, but there's one other point, and be remiss of me not to say it, and that's of course leading to Lough Neagh and the importance of the department itself, not only developing policies but developing those with a range of stakeholders and indeed landowners and anyone with a particular interest on the Lough or around the Lough, and I'm sure, Jerry, you would support that. But this is specifically for Jerry. Would you agree with me that one of the worst decisions made in regard to Lough Neagh, aside from what's going on, was the closure of the limnology department at Triad Point? This was Ulster University premises, which conducted very extensive scientific research into the Lough and was a key factor for many, many people in actually knowing what's going on in the Lough. And with that closure, I think there was a big mistake by the University of Ulster, as it was that time, but also we've seen the consequences of it because under-resourced AFBI and government departments just, for one reason or another, didn't have a handle on what was happening to Lough Neagh. So I've made, maybe if those are some questions or speeches or whatever, but there's salient points in there, and I would just like to hear what your opinions are on them, please.
I think the closure of the research centre was a bit of a disaster, but it's certainly on a list of, as well, Patsy, a lot of disastrous decisions or decisions that weren't made. But yes, in terms of it's come back to bite us all, there should have been somebody on the ground, again, as my theme of the day, on the ground doing research and sampling that water really over the last 20 years, without a doubt. But as I say, it's one of a list of things that were never done. E.g., there's no special protected area plan for Lough Neagh. E.g., 25 years later after the this is not their responsibility, but 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement, there's no navigation authority on Lough Neagh. I could go on and go on as well, But you're perfectly right. It is certainly one of the bad decisions for the landscape of Lough Neagh.
A need for engagement,
There's a need for either a news centre or for Offbeat to be resourced appropriately. And again, going back to my theme, for Offbeat to be on the ground, and on Lough Neagh don't really meet many Offbeat staff, if I'm very frank with you, you know, and I've been there 20 years, you know, so localisation is the answer here. You know.
And the importance of engagement and involvement of communities and individual landowners all associated with the law.
You're not going to do that, you're sitting in Leaf Forge Lane, you know.
If I can, I mean, I would hand over to Jonathan in relation to agriculture, but if I could briefly say, to try and address the point you've just raised, Passy, I mean, we've said that how you do things is really important. That's why we mentioned the need for co-design between the department and actually all departments and the environment sector. And it's about that including the different views, getting the different expertise to build that in and hopefully come up with better policy. So exactly what you've said.
Yeah, just in terms of 2 points, the nature-friendly farming, and then I'll come on to the Agri Act as well. Nature-friendly farmers, in RSPB we work with about 400 farmers across Northern Ireland, and it would be the same for many of the charities involved in the Sustainable Agriculture Policy Working Group. So NFFN, the Nature-Friendly Farming Network, work with hundreds, Ulster Wildlife and National Trust. So we work with quite a few farmers across NI, and they're not just nature-friendly hobby farmers, they're profitable farm businesses but doing great things for nature. And that kind of work is saving species that are really on the brink from extinction, whether it's curlew, lapwing, whatever it may be. And what we need to see is those agri-environment schemes being scaled up and expanded. So it's not just a minority small proportion of the agriculture budget. We want to see money moving across into farming with nature, so that becomes a central pillar of future agriculture policy. And in doing that, we can inspire, empower and incentivise farmers to take the land use actions that are actually going to help us tackle climate change and the nature crisis. In terms of the Agriculture Act, we think we need new legislation here that's really going to pave the way for that sort of new future for farming. We haven't done a lot of detailed thinking yet around what an Agriculture Act would contain or look like, but we have started doing a bit of thinking. As you know, probably the first Agriculture Act here in 1949, it laid out the provision of grants for good agricultural management and development, as well as setting out definitions around agriculture. Following Brexit, DAERA then took out powers in the Westminster Act through a schedule to ensure there was legislative cover to maintain EU direct payments after Brexit. But for us, there's too many moving parts. It needs to be rationalised into one up-to-date, fit-for-purpose, specific Agriculture Act for Northern Ireland. And I believe the Minister said that he's going to bring this forward within this mandate. So for us, new legislation, like has been taken forward in all other jurisdictions, is long overdue. It could set out a clear agricultural transition for farming, rewarding farmers and land managers for managing their land sustainably for nature, climate and people. The new Act could include setting out sustainable land management objectives on the face of the bill around sustainable food for communities, mitigating and adapting to climate change, maintaining and enhancing ecosystems, conserving and enhancing the countryside. We could also have a broad purpose on the face of the bill that would place sustainable land management at the heart of future agricultural policy on the basis of payment for delivery of environmental public goods. It could set out that clear agricultural transition and provide incentives for nature-friendly farming. Commitment to targets for recovery of the natural environment, animal welfare, climate, and outline, I suppose, a strong regulatory baseline as well. As I say, our thinking is very initial on this. We have a lot more digging to do to start to flesh this out.
Do you, John, on a practical place, because all that's, you know, wishful thinking, and, you know, we'll end up with part of it and not part of it.
Yeah.
And on the real practical issues, do you think intensive agricultural production can work and sit side by side with the environment?
Absolutely, we absolutely have to continue to produce food, and we have to do it in the right way. Recently at RSPB, we undertook a partnership project with the Dairy Council of Northern Ireland, probably one of the most intensive agricultural systems in NI, and we produced a best practice guidance document for dairy farmers to demonstrate the nature restoration options that they could undertake on their farm. That wouldn't take a single blade of grass out of production, but what it did show is that those nature restoration options are not being undertaken routinely on dairy farms, and there's a huge opportunity to deliver those options on all farms.
Chair, just one final thing, when that was how you see just transition being woven into the midst of all that.
Yeah. I mean, it's critically important that we have a just and fair transition. We as a sector want to see farming continue to get the money that it currently gets, if not more. We just want to repurpose what they're doing with that money and how they're managing their land to help us tackle issues like Lough Neagh, like emissions, like ammonia. There's a Just Transition Fund included in a clause within the legislation. That can't be a status quo fund. It has to actually be to enable a transition. That could be for farming advice. It could be for delivery of nature-based solutions on farms. It could be for capital grants. So I think that's a really important fund that can actually, reward farmers and support them as they make the transition.
Just Chair, I think when we did our study, farmers were concentrating on the price of fuel, fertiliser and feed. Remember the 3 Fs, and I think we've got to be careful when we talk about intensive farming, because there's a lot of nutrients. It's caused the problem in Lough Neagh that you can't go above. You're going to get problems further downstream. Pardon the pun. So while you're saying, can we have intense farming? You've got to be very careful there going forward and in transition. We are looking for an agroecological system, production system here for Northern Ireland to make us in front of the wave here. We don't want to be left behind doing practices that are now proven to be harmful to our soils and our planet.
You're not as convinced.
I'm not as convinced.
Well, Chair, just to endorse.
I disagree.
No, we're not. Just to endorse Patricia's point, former president of the NFU, who authored the Independent Strategic Review of Agri-Food in Northern Ireland, stated, "We do not have a positive story to tell from an environmental perspective in Northern Ireland, so things have to change. We have to do things better, and we must do things better." So we need to look at the reform of policy that's driven farmers in the direction they've gone. It's not farmers' fault. We need to inspire them, and we need to inform them and incentivise them to do things differently, because intensification, specialisation has not been good for the environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, sorry, Chair, there's some very good young farmers with enthusiasm for different ideas.
Older farmers with that
some of-
enthusiasm as well. Patricia.
Okay, I take that too, but those innovation, they need support, and the transition from one generation to the other, Tom, within a family farm. Those younger people need the support to look at these new models, and they are doing that. And we need to encourage and support them and resource it.
John Blair.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. I think we're heading in the direction that I was hoping we would, in showing that transition isn't just about funding the introduction of policies we have not yet seen, but it's actually about rethinking everything we do and how we do it, which has led to some of the situations we've seen. We'll come to that. Before, I want to say to Patricia, Jerry, Malachy and Johnny, welcome and thanks for all you do all of the time, whether there's an assembly or not, and keeping us involved and informed of your work. And I'm going to single out Jerry today because in the midst of the worst ecological crisis that our waterways have ever seen at Lough Neagh last year, Jerry, Lough Neagh Partnership kept us all involved, and I know you did everything you could in the interests of those who live their lives and conduct their livelihoods around the shores of that loch, as well as those who walk, swim and do other things there. So put on record, thank you for bringing together all of those different aspects of our community. I want to address this issue of the loch as what could be argued as the chemical and waste collection basin for all of its catchment. And that's what last year was the outworking of. There's no point in dressing it up in any other way. We know from the department's own figures that the levels of phosphorus are 7 times what they should be, and that the levels of nitrates are 1.5 times what they should be. Those are the department's figures, not mine. And they gave me at the briefings they offered MLAs. Is it not the case we shouldn't talk about Lough Neagh without addressing the issue of the entire catchment? Because it's what's flowing from that catchment into the loch that is the issue here. So therefore, any specific bespoke Lough Neagh policies are very limited in their scope if you're not immediately and automatically including the catchment. And you could argue all of our waterways so that they reach the standard that none of them have yet reached.
Before I hand over to Jerry, who's obviously going to get into the specifics of Lough Neagh, if I could just say, in relation to that good question and good point, John, this is why at the start we said that in relation to co-design, one of the first things that should be done is there should be the co-design of a strategy to tackle freshwater pollution across Northern Ireland. I mean, Lough Neagh is the unfortunate illustration of many of the long-standing chronic problems that there have been in Northern Ireland for 20 or more years in relation to freshwater management and freshwater pollution, which has gone on for far too long. So absolutely it needs to be cross-cutting, absolutely it needs to look at not just the Lough Neagh catchment, but the broader sort of like approach to how we manage our land and how we manage our water resources. I mean, in 2023, blue-green algae were reported in 65 locations across Northern Ireland. And I know that in and around Lower Lough Erne and the Chair's constituency, that there was about a dozen locations. But this is a problem that was across...
For short periods of time?
Yes.
Yeah.
This was a problem that was across Northern Ireland. And actually, even already this year, there are reports of blue-green algae in a number of places, again, one of which is in your constituency, Chair, at Mill Loch, near Ballinalack. Also at a couple of places in and around the shores of Lough Neagh, Cranfield Point and Raise Wood. So there are signs that this is happening again. So it is a clear illustration of a long-term chronic problem which will not be solved by there's a few quid to go out and measure something. This needs to be tackled on a long-term basis in a strategic way, looking across the departments and looking across the different problems that are creating this problem. So I'll hand over to Jerry.
Just on that, Malachy, I think one of the options as well would be around piloting schemes in the catchment. So we've 6 rivers that drain into Lough Neagh. We've known about this problem for decades in terms of nutrient running into Lough Neagh. And unfortunately now we're seeing the outworkings of years of political inaction on the issue. But if we were to pilot something like, bringing back the floodplains, so maybe paying farmers to allow their land to flood, so restoring the floodplain, because a lot of that land has been flooded. The water is gushing down into Lough Neagh very, very quickly. So we need to slow the flow and look at alternative mechanisms. So we could take one of the rivers or one of the tributaries and look at doing something really innovative on that tributary.
So would, Patricia, you're going to come in, I have another question for you as well. And Patricia, separate to Lough Neagh, but should there then be that this expectation of cooperation, should that be a statutory duty to cooperate for the departments and agencies involved?
If I were to be specific, I think I would have to say there is not a firm agreed Neil position on that, but I think that would be the right sort of approach. I think it would be a very good idea, and I think common sense would tell you that if there's a number of different aspects that's going to create a problem, you've got to talk to all the different component parts to try and solve that problem.
And ensure that there's that cooperation.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would like to think, as you've said, like given the probably the greatest freshwater crisis we've had in this region for such a long time, I would like to think that given that, there would be a willingness from all stakeholders to cooperate to try and solve that problem.
Yeah.
If it were necessary to have a statutory duty, then I think that could only help, because everybody really has to be involved in this. So I generally, if I can say, I think it would be a very good idea, although I hope it would not be
that's
necessary.
helpful, Malachy. Thank you. On a broader basis, if I may just throw that in as well, I mean, there are other aspects. This committee looks after agriculture, obviously, as well, and rural affairs. And on the subject of rural affairs in our rural communities, I know that Jerry and his organisation, for example, have been pushing for many years for a navigation plan for Lough Neagh, which hasn't been addressed either. And this is the business of this committee, and it's something we could look at further down the line. But as well as addressing the problems of today, we should be talking about that as one of the opportunities for tomorrow, so to speak. On a separate issue...
That's certainly not immune just to Lough Neagh, John, because we have...
No, it's not.
Lough Erne as well.
No, Erne and other...
What about Ireland?
Absolutely.
We do, but there's still other organisations of responsibility for navigation. Sorry, I didn't
bring
want
that together for the betterment of our recreation and our tourism, as well as our rural communities. The other question I was going to ask, Patricia, if I can, the sustainable food places, I think you called the scheme that you mentioned in relation to Belfast City Council. Some involvement back in a previous life of the rollout of the allotment schemes at local council levels, for example, in our communities, and saw some pretty good outcomes from that. Can I ask you, in this specific scheme, is that unique to Belfast City Council, or are all the councils involved in that?
No, it's a UK-wide programme, so
And are
Belfast City
Northern
Council
councils included?
have taken it up. There's 5 councils that are pretty active on this: Derry, Newry, Morning Down, Mid and East, Antrim, Ards and North Down. These are the ones we've worked with for Manna
Okay.
coming
and others
along.
could still, other councils, if they're not involved currently, could become involved.
They're looking at it, yeah. They're because it's just like we have been discussing, it's all about relationship building across the sector and understanding each person's part in it. It's a part of a big system, big jigsaw puzzle that needs. So we do think from the studies, a couple of quite deep studies that we have done, that relationship building is the foundation for change. That is where, when you get people round the table talking, that brings change, and that goes for Loughney and other environmental issues that we face. It is about bringing everybody round the table.
Okay,
And
John.
you mentioned all these strategies. I feel the same, but I think it's because we haven't had a government that we have a whole lot of strategies sitting waiting to be published, and we would like to get to that stage and be implementing them. You know.
Yeah, the problem is some strategies will almost go against some other strategies. That's my problem with all these strategies. You get one and it negates another one, and sometimes they're in conflict with each other. And that's why my view always is to try and have one overarching one.
That's a good point, Chair. I would be tempted to say not if it's done properly, and doing it properly would probably involve co-design with the environment sector, so hopefully that might solve the problem.
Chair, can I just
In
say...
the end, the end option is, what does it mean for the people on the ground?
Yeah.
That's the...
You have to involve people in these things, absolutely, Chair, definitely.
Sorry, Jerry.
Sorry.
Sure, thank you. Can I just sort of emphasise that, and it's praise to MLAs and praise to the Stormont government, in the sense that it hasn't been easy trying to persuade civil servants when this government and this committee hasn't been here in terms of saying set up an integrated body for Loughney. Not even talking about money, just set up a meeting whereby we can meet 3 or 4 times a year to an integrated. So I'm just wanting to.
John, were you finished?
I'm finished, yeah, thank you, Chair.
Michelle?
Thanks, Chair. I really only have sort of one area because it's been more or less covered, everything else has been covered. But throughout your presentation and the paper that you referenced really the need for increased long-term resourcing and for funding. You've outlined a lengthy list of strategies, all of which will require funding to be implemented. Jerry, you mentioned AFBI needed to be funded and resourced more. We have the talk of an independent environment agency again, which will, as Patsy has outlined, will need to be resourced properly, but yet we have the OEP currently doing the job isn't being resourced properly. So my concern in all of this, we also have a Climate Change Act which will need to be implemented. Again, we don't know how much it's going to cost, we don't know who's going to pay for it. But there's also a bit of a conflict there between the Climate Change Act and also the environmental strategies and issues that you yourselves will also be dealing with. And I suppose it's about how those are resourced and resourced adequately. But I suppose the concern that I generally have is the fact that we raise expectations, and sometimes we're not being responsible in raising our expectations, and we're not being realistic as to what can be delivered. So I suppose really just a thought to yourselves, have you given any consideration to the ask that's required in order to make all these things deliverable and achievable?
Thank you for your question, Michelle. I think it's a very good question. It's very important because the financial aspects of all these things that are being either suggested or pointed out as being overdue on our obligations is a very good one. I hope that I can actually offer you some reassurance if I refer back to the letter that the UK Climate Change Committee sent to the ERA Minister on the 1st of April 2021. As I'm sure you know, the UK Climate Change Committee is a statutory advisor to the UK Government on climate change issues, and it also provides advice to each of the devolved administrations, and will have covered each of the devolved administrations in its previous reports. I'm just going to read you a quote from that letter to the Minister, if I can. And it's in relation to the question of costs. And it says, quote, "These investment costs should not be interpreted as capital expenditure that will be delivered solely through the Northern Ireland budget, nor as costs that only Northern Irish businesses and consumers have to bear. Many of the actions to reduce emissions will likely be paid for at UK level and or socialised across the whole of the UK." Also in that letter, just to say, because the Climate Change Committee addressed a number of issues in that, they also said this, and this is another quote. They said, "A slower path to decarbonisation in Northern Ireland would bring large-scale risks that would be difficult to manage." So that's hopefully addressing some of the points in relation to cost, but I would say generally, having read through a lot of the evidence and the advice from various groups, primarily the UK Climate Change Committee, it's clear that the many potential benefits of moving to a net zero greenhouse gas economy are becoming clear, and I think overall it's clear that it's worthwhile. Again, I'm going to refer back to what the Climate Change Committee said in their 6th carbon budget report, and this was in relation to economic modelling to achieving net zero, and they suggest that achieving net zero in the UK will give a boost to GDP, growing to around 2% of GDP by 2030, with an accompanying boost to employment of around 1%. According to this analysis, the GDP boost will continue growing after 2030 before levelling off at around a 3% boost by 2050. And the Climate Change Committee also said in that 6th carbon budget report, quote, that achieving net zero can provide a significant economic boost in the coming years and support the UK's economic recovery. And if I can just finally again refer back to the UK Climate Change Committee and the 6th carbon budget report, there is again lots of evidence of the long-term benefits of investing in actually an area that we are now compelled to follow. I mean, it's not just economically sensible, we were compelled to do this. We have targets in the Climate Change Act Northern Ireland 22. Those are legal targets, we have to follow them anyway. Apart from the fact that the growth in investment globally and probably region-wide and country-wide is in low-carbon options. But I'm going to refer you back to research from the Institute for Public Policy and Research, and they found that greater investment in a green recovery and low-carbon jobs could create 1.6 million new jobs over the next decade in the UK, of which over 40,000 could be in Northern Ireland. Now that's an interesting figure because
I do think I need to.
Well, I was going to say that's 3 times.
We're really under time pressure.
It's 3
here.
times the current low carbon and renewable energy economy.
But look,
in
I have to say,
Michelle,
I have to say, a lot of that is could be and maybe and potentially. So look, I have to say, all of that is pretty much pie in the sky for now. Like, we didn't follow, this Assembly didn't follow the Climate Change Committee's recommendations back in the last mandate of the Climate Change Act. Further, our own department have indicated that there's going to be a cost to departments here of 2.3 billion up to 2027, of which there's been no indication so far of where that money's coming from at all. So we need to just be careful in throwing those figures out.
Look, evidence for that,
really briefly.
Just one point to follow up, Michelle. I recognise and support your concern around finite budgets. We're hearing it in the news all the time around government budgets. We as a sector for nature restoration need to be looking at private sector financing as well, and we'd really welcome government support to try and help mobilise that. We get bits of money from the private sector. We need to be careful about greenwashing, but there's a real opportunity for us to mobilise private sector financing as a hybrid model of financing.
Very quickly, again, it's been said, but just to re-emphasise, it's not just new money coming in, it's the reallocation, reprioritisation of existing budget within, basic farm payment and beef sustainable packages, and then the nature farming friendly. 1% of the total budget, 1% in Northern Ireland is for nature farm friendly. So in England it's 12%. So there's a there's a target that compete in terms of reallocation of existing budgets.
Declan wanted in very quickly.
Sure, thanks for letting me back in again. I really appreciate that, because it's been a very interesting and wide-ranging discussion. The one thing I suppose I do want to say is, the north here, indeed all of Ireland, is recognised as a very good food producing region. And I actually attended the Northern Ireland Food and Drink Awards ceremony on behalf of the committee on Friday night. Fantastic showcase of our local produce and sector here. And also we recently got the protected geographical indication status for our grass-fed beef as well. So it's a good food producing region. Now, do you think that there's a danger, right? And I'm conscious that because we're in the EU now, we don't have two pillars. We don't have Pillar 1, single farm payment, and Pillar 2, rural development programme. We just have the one pot now, so we have, which is an unfortunate consequence of that. Do you think then that, see the farm, and I know that some of the best environmentalists I've ever met are farmers, by the way, right? So there's no, they're not in competition. But the point I'm saying is, do you think there's a danger that, see the Farming for Nature, which is part of a new policy, that could have the potential of land managers gobbling up a lot of the farming budget and undermine our ability to continue producing food?
I think we're always going to have to keep producing food. That's a really important part of the rural economy, and farmers will still be subsidised for that. I think and the point Jerry made, is such a small slice of the budget goes to agri-environment right now, and it delivers so much in terms of public goods. So the things that we're trying to address, water quality, air quality, sequestering more carbon, those kinds of public goods, you can actually put a real value on. And that's, I think, where we need to just reprioritise the budget. But we will still produce food, but we just must do it in a better way. And even in our intensively farmed landscapes, we can do so much more for nature, for carbon, for water. And I think the independent strategic review of agri-food, where Peter Kendall said we do not have a positive story to tell from an environmental perspective, that was quite telling. We have to do better, and we have to change things, and we have to look to address the environmental consequences of food production, because those are negative externalities that currently aren't accounted for in the economic model. So whether it's ammonia and the cost of cleaning it up, whether it's carbon emissions and the cost of that, the cost of water quality and cleaning that up. So we need to internalise those costs that are associated with food production. But we should maintain our quality food.
But one very brief. Now, seriously, we've given it. But over to you, Malachy, and then Patricia.
I was just going to say, Chair, if you allow me to finish on a positive note, I'm going to quote the former ERA Minister from the foreword to the DERA climate change discussion document from a couple of years ago. And the former Minister said this: tackling climate change should be viewed not just as an environmental challenge, but also as an economic opportunity.
Just to say, some of these initiatives are not about finance. They are about mindset of working together and solving things together. And although we need resourced and innovation needs resourced, it's not heavy on the finance. It's about how we think about these things. The renaissance of the market garden that we had years ago on the periphery in the peri-urban area and urban agriculture is all new, innovative things that we can look at and we can have deep demonstration projects on, but they're not that costly. We want to try and maybe fail, but keep trying different types of growing and different types of food production. And it's not all finance. Member McIlvaine was asking about your budget. It's a very difficult thing to prioritise, but there's other things, and one of them is having us here today. We really welcome being here today to talk with you.
Look, Malachy, Jonathan.
Thank you for your time.
Patricia and Jerry, thank you very much. Do appreciate it, and it's been quite a long session, so we do appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No, members, sorry, just there's one quick issue. Declan, you wanted something under matters arising that we missed. Apologies.
Sorry, Chair. And last week on the matters arising, on the matters arising last week, the department had said that they had changed the advice on ammonia without carrying out an EQAA. Would it be possible for us maybe to get a wee steer from our legal services as to in relation to that matter?
Actually, did they say at that meeting, Declan, that they were addressing that?
Retrospectively.
Okay. All right.
Just get a wee steer.
All happy with that, members?
Oh, you're taking those. Yes, Chair, happy.
Okay. Quick recess while we get the next.
Very quick recess. Yeah.
2 minutes.
Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 21. Sound.
So I welcome the officials from the Office of Environmental Protection. You're very welcome. Dame Glynis Stacey, Ms Natalie Prosser, Mr Craig McGuckin and Dr Donoghue Doddy. You're all very welcome. So I'll leave it over to you for your presentation of 10 minutes and then you'll be open to questions, I hope, from members.
Thank you very much, Chair. So we've just a short time, I believe, before you today, and so I'll keep this opening address short. This is a very timely visit for us with the Assembly now restored, and with the opportunity now with our CEO and our Northern Ireland colleagues to appear here this morning. And we're to meet with Minister Muir this afternoon as well, and there'll be plenty to discuss with the long-awaited Environmental Improvement Plan and the pressing need for an effective ammonia strategy and the state of Lough Neagh, just a few of the pressing matters. Although there are things to welcome, we know as well, for example, the soil nutrient health scheme here in Northern Ireland, an enviable scheme from my perspective. Now, Malcolm Beattie, our Northern Ireland board member, is regrettably unable to join us today. He's recovering from a period of ill health, but is thankfully on the mend, and indeed we met this morning. And so we here represent the OEP today, and I'll just pause to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves. Let's start with Craig.
Thanks, Des. So, Craig McGuckin. My role is Northern Ireland Lead with the OEP. It's a general position to try to help the OEP be as effective as possible in Northern Ireland. My background is quite broad. I've worked in a number of different sectors, quite a lot of work in the heritage sector. And prior to the OEP, I was Chief Executive with Northern Ireland Environment Link for 9 years.
Thank you, Craig. Nat.
Good morning, everyone. I'd first like to say I'm very grateful to be invited to talk to you here today. My name's Natalie Prosser. I'm the Chief Executive of the OEP. I've been in post for just over 3 years, and prior to that I was a government lawyer for about 15 years.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Donncha Dooley. I'm Head of Analysis for the OEP in Northern Ireland. Previous to working with the OEP, I would have worked with AFBI for 15 years. I would have been Head of Catchment Science for 10 of those, and the last couple of years I was Head of the Agri-Environmental branch, which did a lot of the research around air, soil and water.
Okay, thank you.
That's us, thank you. So we know that the OEP is not a household name. It's not a daily topic of conversation here or anywhere else for that matter, but we do aim to be a force for good. So just to explain, we are not an arm of government. We are not a non-governmental organisation, an NGO or a campaign or pressure group. Rather, we are a creature of statute, and our authority is taken from the provisions that relate to us in the Environment Act. Now, you'll have seen, hopefully, from the briefing note that we've sent to you already, that we've undertaken a range of work in Northern Ireland, and we have substantial programmes of work currently in hand, and we aim to do more and plan to do so subject to the right level of resourcing, which is something which we perhaps might come back to in this session. But we can assure you now that we do have technical expertise and a wider understanding so as to give government here good advice, and we can deal carefully and sure-footedly with complaints made to us about potential breaches of environmental law. I think we've had 14 of those to date from Northern Ireland. And we can, and indeed we have, held government's feet to the fire when necessary to ensure compliance with environmental law. And we can shine a light for the Assembly, for this committee, for the wider public on government's progress in meeting its stated ambitions for the environment. And in that respect, we're really looking forward to Northern Ireland's first environmental improvement plan and underlying delivery plans for that high-level document, so that we can then undertake our role in tracking delivery over time and reporting annually for you on progress. So yes, we aim to be a force for good, to use our powers wisely and undertake our statutory duties professionally and well. We can be trusted, I think, is what I'm trying to get across, as an impartial, evidence-based and authoritative voice in the environment. Now, we know that we won't always succeed to the full. Ministers don't have to do as we would wish. Of course they don't. Of course they don't. There's a democratic model. And so we will be limited in some respects, and certainly limited by the resources at our disposal. But subject to those constraints, we do aim to do the best job here and make the best possible difference to the environment in Northern Ireland. Now, we understand your sessions today are to inform your deliberations about your work programme for the months ahead, and we're happy to assist with that and to answer any questions you might have of us or our role or our priorities or whatever in order to help you in your deliberations. So thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak.
Thank you very much. Yes, and obviously quite a new department or quite a new organisation to Northern Ireland.
Yes.
And I did have the pleasure of meeting some of your representatives last year. Just to clear up one thing that was raised by Northern Ireland Environment Link before you came in, you may have heard it, where they said you didn't have the powers to take a department to court here, court challenge, is that correct?
I think there was a misunderstanding there, Chair. We do have authority to take any department or any aspect of government or any public body to court if they are in breach of environmental law.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's very clear.
Okay.
Thanks
for clearing that up. So, do you have no powers whatsoever to deal with businesses or individuals? It's solely government departments and agencies?
It's public bodies, and the definition's, quite broad. Okay. So, for example, in England, if there's a water authority acting, delivering a public service, then we are able to deal with that as a public body. So the key is about delivering a public service. But no, we don't have leverage directly over private business or individuals. We do have leverage over local authorities.
Okay. Can I ask about the advice you give to departments as well?
Yes.
And is that specific, and can you advise the Assembly, the Northern Ireland Assembly? Because I'm just thinking back to the last, when I wasn't in the mandate, the climate change bill that was coming forward. You can advise on things like that?
Yes, we can advise, and we have given advice in Northern Ireland. So there are two circumstances in which we can give advice. One is if the Assembly or government is thinking of changing the law, then we can step in and give advice. Okay. And secondly, we can give advice whenever we are asked for it by a minister. And we really welcome those approaches because we have some technical expertise. And if there's an issue of concern to a minister, I think we can assist at least in explaining the issue and setting out any problems and any wider context, if you like. So we would welcome those approaches, most certainly now that the Assembly is back.
And finally from me, you may have heard an issue that I raised at the last presentation here around Moboy. Don't know whether you're aware of it. And the failures that took place in relation to that and the build-up. Have you any comment to make on that around who were the failures, or what were the failures in that present?
Thank you. So I'll turn to Craig in a moment, who may be more informed than me, but I was listening to the questions with interest and reflecting, of course, one would assume there's a failure of regulation here of some sort, and I'm very interested in, for example, the routine for inspection in relation to such matters here. Now, we would really like to do some work on inspection regimes here in Northern Ireland. We are certainly going to be doing that work in England. We are not yet funded to do it in Northern Ireland, but we'd be eager to do so. But this does seem to me to come down to, the double-edged sort of inspection and enforcement at the right moment. But I'll leave it there for the moment and see, Craig, whether you wanted to add anything.
Thanks, Liz. I can only make a general comment, really. As we heard earlier, Moboy is such a serious example of failing of environmental governance. And whenever the OEP was setting up in Northern Ireland, waste in general is one of the issues that came up time and again. So it's an area that we know is of massive concern. We're aware of what's going on. We know the case is still happening. The Mills report, I think, has lots of good recommendations in it. And I suspect there's a bit of an issue there in terms, there's an example of a report, lots of recommendations, but they haven't quite been delivered on. So, there's something there. The main thing I would say about Moboy is it's the lessons you learn from it. It's a real example of where we've gone badly wrong, and it's going to have massive impacts economically on the environment. There's potential human health impacts, and I think a joined up approach is probably the answer there.
Well, I think,
I'm sorry, I can't be more specific.
yeah, I think, Craig, though, if you live beside it, it's not for those people the lessons that will be learned from it, it's what they can do now about it. So I have to say, from what you have said, that it's a very serious environmental issue. I'm a wee bit surprised that you haven't taken more interest in it, and maybe even an investigation into it, because I suppose some from the farming community will say you've been very quick to look at other aspects, but not this, which is a very, very serious environmental crime issue.
Can I just turn to our CEO just to deal with our status actually in relation to this particular type of issue, because we're not necessarily the first responder, but perhaps you could just be a little bit more explicit about that in this context. Yeah.
It's always helpful to clarify, and you asked a very good question about where our jurisdiction starts and ends, and it doesn't extend to operators, for example. But I just wondered, Chair, if you could clarify for me whether your suggestion is that we investigate the government's handling of that case.
That has been my point throughout the last evidence session here and here, is that there seems to have been a failure within government somewhere, because what we're hearing is that there are measures to deal with this, and there were measures to deal with it, but they haven't been implemented by whether that is local authorities, whether it's NIEA, whether it's the department or whoever, but it hasn't happened. So if it hasn't happened, there has been a failure somewhere. There's no point in looking at what could have been done under an independent environmental protection agency if we can't resolve what was failed and what went wrong in the current process.
Craig's already mentioned the Mills report, which looks into this. One of the things that I would note, though, is that we have live criminal prosecution going on in this case. And one of the approaches that we often take when we're dealing with questions of potential regulatory failure, it would be quite wrong of us to cross over into live prosecutions, particularly when those regulators are directly involved. By doing that, we can sometimes inadvertently trip over those cases, and that would be quite wrong for us to do, and we wouldn't want to compromise that. Our chair referenced a piece of work that we are commencing in England, and this is looking into how well inspections work in the waste sector. We know it's a serious issue. It's a serious issue in England. It's a serious issue here in Northern Ireland. We're not resourced to do that work in Northern Ireland. And that would be our, at a higher level, probe into exactly what's working and what's not working. That would be more appropriate at this time while live proceedings are ongoing. As I said, we never want to compromise a live case in that way. We'd do the same in England as well, and have done, and stood back where first responder organisations are still dealing with live issues. Okay,
well, it'll be interesting to see what stage those are at, because I had a briefing recently, but we'll leave it for there. Michelle?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. And I've met Craig and Malcolm in their previous roles and in this, so it was good to see you again. In his first question time to the Assembly, I asked the Minister around his assessment of the effectiveness of the OEP and also whether or not it has been fully funded. And he said, as part of the environmental review, we need to look at how it relates to Northern Ireland. I can see benefits associated with it here, where it has called us out on what we are doing, but does it have the understanding that is needed in Northern Ireland? I'm also not entirely sure about that, and the review hopefully will be able to tease that out. So interested to know what your response to that would be, given obviously I'm aware of there is experience from Northern Ireland, but in the round what your comment would be in regard to that, and also the issue around funding, because you've also referenced a couple of times with your response to the Chair that you're not resourced to do that or not funded to do that, and is that because of the limitations on the funding that has come from government?
Thank you very much for those questions. So in relation to the understanding, we do have a physical presence here. We have drop-in offices in Belfast. We have 15 really very good staff in Northern Ireland, although we're not funded for those here. We're actually funded for about 10. So we do have to make sure that those staff spend some of their time on work relating to England, actually, so that we don't inadvertently misuse public money. But we've been very careful in those selections, and we also have a board member for Northern Ireland as well, which is very welcome. We are doing a good piece of work, I think, now looking at the drivers and pressures in Northern Ireland in relation to the environment, because I don't think that piece of work's been done before, and we're getting on very well with that, and I'm sure you will find it useful when we have it, identifying why things are as they are in relation to the environment. So with the resource we have, we are truly doing all that we can to be as knowledgeable and aware and wise in our work in Northern Ireland, and I'm personally proud of how far that we've got with that. On the funding issue, we are not adequately funded, and we've made that plain to all those who will listen. So, for example, in the current year, we bid for 1.71 million. Now, we did not bid excessively. We did a careful piece of work to identify what we needed, not to be the best organisation we could be, but to be a credible organisation, to do the statutory work we have to do and a little bit more. And we asked for 1.71 million, and we got in total 1.25. 1 million in response to the bid, which frankly was galling. And then over the course of the year, an extra $250,000. Of course, in-year funding isn't so useful in terms of getting work underway. This year we are bidding for 2.071 million, again, to be a credible organisation. And we'll wait to see soon enough where we get to with that. But we can identify really useful pieces of work that we could do to improve matters here for all concerned if we are funded to do it. And it's desperately uncomfortable knowing that we have those on the blocks, on the starting blocks, but will, unless things change, not be able to proceed with them. Natalie, did you want to say anything else about developing our understanding?
I think you've done a good summary there, Chair. I like to think of the OEP as an inward investor in Northern Ireland. We have recruited many of our roles as being either Northern Ireland or England based. We operate as an integrated organisation, and we've been very fortunate to recruit some real talent here in the north of Ireland. Now, I think we get, and I think Northern Ireland gets good value from those folks. With a very little more, we could do an awful lot more. And I can give you very specific examples of that. So, for example, we've very recently done an extensive piece of work looking at the planning regime. We originally planned to do that for England and Northern Ireland, and we ended up doing it just for England because we didn't have the resourcing. Going into next year, the inspections work I've already mentioned, we're not resourced to do that in Northern Ireland. We're commencing some marine work, which we will not be resourced to do in Northern Ireland. However, we have taken forward work on clean water and protected sites, which we've taken forward as England and Northern Ireland combined pieces of work. And there's real efficiency in doing that, because what Northern Ireland gets is the full capacity of our organisation, delving deeply into fundamentally important issues here. So that's what we're living and breathing, and I think my chair's already covered the specifics there.
Follow up on that. I'm a little bit confused with regards to your bid, because obviously you've asked for just over 2 million for the incoming year to make you a credible organisation. Mm-hmm. Does that make you a fully functioning organisation as to what you would like to, in order to be able to cover the functions that you've outlined, including inspection?
So I should explain that one can bid a bare minimum, which is just fulfilling our statutory duties. So that here would be dealing with complaints and also for example, reporting annually against the Environmental Improvement Plan. We there are greater expectations of us, actually. So, for example, giving advice when the law is changing and monitoring environmental law to make sure it's working. There are more things we could do. So the pitch is a bit more than just the bare minimum, so that we can do those things. But there are 68 and more other things we could do if we were all singing, all dancing. We recognise the position that public funding is in, not just here, but in England as well. We are not shooting for the moon. We are simply asking to do enough that you will regard us as a credible player.
And if I can contextualise a little bit further, what you can't see from the surface of those figures is because the Environmental Improvement Plan has not yet been adopted, we have been able to delay the growth of the organisation in order to do the annual monitoring of the delivery of the EIP in Northern Ireland that we're already doing in England. So it is not a case of bolting on some extra nice things to do. That additional funding will just take us up to the level of being able to do the core role to a competent level and have sufficient funding to take forward necessary investigations. I'll be quite candid. I had to take an accounting officer view on whether to commence an investigation under our current funding. And sometimes in doing that, I will have to make choices to discontinue other work because we are so finely calibrated in terms of our funding. Now, it would be a very uncomfortable position for us to take as an organisation when we have issues of compliance with the law of public authorities to not be able to investigate and resolve those issues. I think that would be very uncomfortable for all of us. Now, we haven't had to make that choice as in to not commence an investigation yet, but we are on the knife edge of that decision if it comes to it.
Patsy?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for attending. Good to see you. Could I just, in relation to, I was looking through some of your presentation here, and of course you've been investigating the levels of ammonia. Could you just give me some insights from a scientific point of view, those levels of ammonia, how detrimental they are and how they impact, whether it's biodiversity or the water courses, or indeed if they contribute to the issues that we see in Lough Neagh, which is near and dear to my own heart, because I live very close and was reared on the shores of Lough Neagh. That'd be useful to get those insights in the first instance, please.
Absolutely. And can I just say that I was fascinated by your discussion on Lough Neagh. I realise that the issues there are long in the making and they're complex, and you do need a short, medium and long-term plan for Lough Neagh, and we have a very keen interest in that, and we'll be discussing that with the Minister this afternoon. But Donegal, you might want to add some of the detail that the member is looking for.
Yeah. So we're not in a position to comment specifically on targets or on the thresholds. Okay, that's not really our role. But what I would point out is that the vast majority of our protected sites have ammonia and nitrate deposition levels that are above what is sustainable. The phosphorus concentration in our rivers continues to rise. Lough Neagh is the best example of unsustainable nutrient practices. And I suppose those will be the sort of issues that we will be interested in addressing. How can we reduce those impacts rather than considering the actual thresholds? That's for government to decide based on the evidence that they...
Particularly the thresholds, where the thresholds and the nitrate levels are more than tripled in the last 4 or 5 years. I've got some very valuable research from the Assembly here that showed that. What I'm interested in is the actual water quality itself, because as you know, a considerable number of people take their water from for human and animal consumption from Lough Neagh. It's how that, from scientifically, how that's impacting and how you see that as being, how important it is to have that rectified.
It's very significant indeed. It is not acceptable in this day and age for people to question the quality of the water that's coming out of their tap. How can that be acceptable? Of course, it's very significant indeed. But it is also part of a wider picture for Northern Ireland. So we know that for surface water bodies generally here, only 31% are in good ecological condition. That isn't acceptable either. So you've got a very pressing issue in Lough Neagh, but it's part of a wider strategic issue that we have a keen interest in.
And it's worth teasing apart the ammonia pressures that gave rise to the investigation that we undertook. And the ammonia pressures there, largely, we're looking at it through the lens of, you've got some beautiful sites here in Northern Ireland, and the ammonia burden was compromising the integrity of those ecosystems with a knock-on effect in terms of the plants and wildlife. So that's one area. In terms of Lough Neagh, it feeds much more into the wider nutrient challenges and the broader programme of work that Donna is leading on in looking at the nutrient pressures and drivers, and that has a direct implication on the Lough Neagh situation.
Maybe if I can come back in there, I suppose we're very much aware that the Lough Neagh issue isn't just a nutrient issue, it's much wider in terms of invasive species, land use change and so forth. But we do see nutrients as a point where we can make a difference, and we're particularly interested in issues around the Nutrient Action Programme, which we've already engaged with DARE on. We'll also be looking at the future agriculture policy and how that can help the nutrient problem, but there's also trade-offs there possibly that we need to consider. And also we'll be considering the efficacy of the wastewater treatment system, yes, and how that's working. And I suppose our overall interest is around is the regulations as a whole, when you look at the Nitrates Action Programme, the Habitats Directive, Water Framework, is that as a whole working? Because if you look back over the last 20 years, all the indicators are going in the wrong way. So that would suggest the current regulations need to be closely looked at.
And if I could as well, please, you mentioned in your briefing document here that you're looking at the drivers and pressures affecting biodiversity right across the north. Now, and I think there's a report due out later this year into that, but you can give us some, if you like, flavours of what those drivers and pressures that are affecting biodiversity, and I presume by that affecting to the detriment of biodiversity.
Right, so I'll turn to you in a moment, Craig, just to say that we commenced this work some months ago because we saw we could make a hopefully valuable contribution for you and other members of the Assembly if you don't have a benchmark sort of to know how things are, and without an environmental improvement plan and undertaking our role to report annually on that. So we thought this would be a really useful piece of work, if you like, to know from the starting point, what you're actually dealing with. But Craig, do you want to give us some? Sorry, I've got the wrong guy. Sorry, you have to put your nose out of joint to everything. Okay.
So yeah, that's a piece of work we hope to have ready for July, before the end of July, and before the end of June. And specifically, what we're interested in there is around the pressures on the natural environment and biodiversity. I suppose there's a lot of talk around what those pressures are, but we want to make sure that the actions that we take and decisions we take are evidence-based. So we've gone right back to look at the evidence, and we've done that in three ways. We've done it through a focus on government documents around priority species and priority habitats, and analysing those documents ourselves, and the pressures that those documents are relating to. We've also done a public call for evidence, so we're asking NGOs and authorities to actually send us in that evidence. And then finally, we've brought in local experts to do reviews for us on particular areas that we feel need to be more greater focus on. So the three areas that seem to be coming out, well, in a very broad sense, the two things that are coming out of our initial analysis are that the land use change and pollution are the two biggest drivers of biodiversity decline in Northern Ireland. But when we're kind of drilling down into that and looking a little bit more detail, the things we're looking for are urban development is one area that we're very interested in, and urban and rural development and how that has impact on biodiversity. Also agriculture, both upland and lowland agriculture, how that has impact on biodiversity. And then the third thing is around river nutrient enrichment of rivers, and hydromorphology in particular will be something that seems to have a big role to play. So they're the areas we're focusing on at the moment. That'll be hopefully in June. We'll be happy to come back to the committee and give more detail on that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well,
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. Couple of wee points. During the course of the presentation and on your briefing notes, you made reference to the one OEP approach, but they also mentioned about England only programmes, and then during the course of the presentation here, there's different references made, not resource for inspection, not resource for marine, not yet funded from DARE, all that there. How can you seriously say there's a one OEP approach when it appears to be that the only programmes you take forward is the ones that you're funded for as opposed to need?
Thank you, and I do understand your concern, and I appreciate the question and the chance to talk about it. And Natalie, I'll come to you in a moment if I may. So when the OEP was first set up, we had the business of designing it, if you like, deciding what sort of shape it would be. And we knew that we would never be excessively resourced. We'd always be a small organisation, and our remit is quite wide in terms of what we have to do as well as where we have to do it. So we made some key decisions that we would have premises in England and premises in Northern Ireland, a footprint here, that we would employ people who live in Northern Ireland, the best people that we could get, and indeed we've been successful, as we've said, and we've got more than we can actually afford. and also that we would offer some services as one organisation. So some examples of that, we have one IT contract for everybody. We have one group of lawyers. Actually, most of our lawyers are England-based, I think that's fair to say, but they bring real understanding, of environmental law across England, and they will be deployed. So if we have an investigation running in Northern Ireland, they will be deployed to that investigation. Indeed, a good proportion of our staff are employed on the basis that they can be moved from one thing to another. So we've got a remarkable amount of flexibility built within the model. We have running costs that any organisation has, and we have calculated as fairly as we can what proportion of those costs Northern Ireland should pay, and we've proposed to DERA that should be 15%. We proposed that last year. It hasn't been accepted and it hasn't been argued against. It's just sitting there, and it'd be good to have that settled actually. But for the moment, we that's our working assumption. And then on top of that, we have to resource individual pieces of work here that we want to do. So any investigation, any report, our work on pressures and drivers, we are resourcing that from money that we get from DERA. So it's a sort of mixed economy model, really. There's basic costs that must be paid. We ask for a proportion, fair proportion of that. And then on top of that, there are pieces of work, programs and projects that we want to do. And we have staffed our organisation as flexibly as we can to make sure that we can service our priorities in Northern Ireland and in England. And indeed, so far so good. But Natalie, did you want to add anything?
Just to say that we design our programmes to be country specific. So we want to do work that's most appropriate for the two jurisdictions, and that's quite appropriate. Sometimes the issues that we look at apply to both jurisdictions, and there are efficiencies and scale gains for both jurisdictions to do those as combined England, Northern Ireland. But there are different programmes which are relevant to one jurisdiction, but not so much the other, and it would be inappropriate, I think, to prioritise the wrong thing in the wrong jurisdictions. That's why we have that. Our operating model is fully blended. If we've got a major investigation in Northern Ireland, I can put my whole investigations team on it, regardless of where they are based. If I need all the legal support, I could deploy all of my lawyers, and I have 2 Northern Ireland qualified lawyers in the team. That's how we've designed it. So Northern Ireland has access to my full 75 suite of staff, but I have to balance the books so that the focus of work is appropriately balanced from the amount of revenue we get from the 2 countries. That's essentially what we do.
Chair, just a short follow on then. So obviously, pre-Brexit, that your function was carried out by the EU Commission. Is that correct? So, see then, going back to the last presentation, a lot of environmental and biodiversity issues and doing environmental crime, it straddles across the border as well. But you seem to be based more on like a England sort of within, you don't cross, you have no jurisdiction over across the rest of the island. So how, presumably in the past before Brexit, the EU Commission, when we were all in the EU, would have having that oversight because all of the island was in the EU, but now a piece of it out of it, and you are operating one part of it. How can you seriously, effectively address the issue of cross-border issues and cross-border environmental crime, for example?
Again, a really, really pertinent question. And of course, we don't choose our jurisdiction. In fact, in England, we don't have jurisdiction in Wales or Scotland in the same, not exactly cross-border, but in terms of the environmental issues, they don't stop at the border. But Craig, would you like to just explain how we are approaching the cross-border issue that we have by the very nature of our jurisdiction here? Thank you.
Yeah, so, you've heard it before, the island's a single biogeographic unit, and so there's so many aspects of the environment, marine invasive species, climate change, actual cross-border sites, catchment areas, protected sites, and so on. So our remit's Northern Ireland, but we have to have a sense of that cross-border element. So we've engaged fairly well. We're a young organisation. We've been engaging throughout our programmes. We've met with organisations like the Irish Environmental Protection Agency. We've had a really good meeting with the Centre for Cross-Border Studies, talking about the various structures that are in place. Some of the programmes that are in the briefing, things like protected sites, waste, freshwater marine, all those programmes have had some engagement on a cross-border basis. I think there's some really good developments. There's a new development around All Ireland Science Centres, which we're involved in, and I'll bring maybe Donegan in that in a moment. I would say from a slightly personal basis, my experience, cross-border structures in the environment haven't been as effective as they could have been. There are definitely gaps. Environment Link, who were here earlier, doing an interesting programme connecting with the Irish Environmental Network. So there's a lot of work, I think, that needs to be done there. I would say that for us, as we expand our programmes in the future, we'll do more. I'll say the board has had 2 visits to Northern Ireland. The next, we're hoping to go to Derry, and that would be a good opportunity for some cross-border focus. But maybe I'll bring in Donegan about the science centres.
Before you do as well, we don't pretend it's not an issue. We know it's difficult. Donegan.
So I suppose one of the things we are interested in making best use of the science and the evidence that's available across the whole of the island, and the development of the Climate Plus Centre, the Shore Food Centre, and the Lunds Centres that have been funded jointly from Science Foundation Ireland, DERA, and UK research centres. That gives us a really good opportunity to make, to take an all Ireland approach in terms of the evidence and the science that we are looking at and making links with those people. And we've already had discussions with them. The other thing that we have done is that in our pressures and drivers work, when we put out a call for evidence, we ask questions around that cross-border issue to see where are the issues that we might need to think about. And also we would have had contact with research people and so forth down south to provide us with the evidence up north. So we are trying to make it as best use as we can of what's available in the whole of the island, but also what's across in GB as well, and drawing that in. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. John.
Chair, thank you, and thanks to OEP personnel presenting today. I want to clarify, and I think we can do this a short and sharp way if you don't mind, because even though there's some details in the report, we had a conversation during a previous session about capacity and resource. So, in short, with 15 staff, you couldn't possibly be the prosecutorial or investigative role in play that currently done by NIEA, and some of us would prefer done by an independent Environmental Protection Agency. That's a simple case, isn't it? You couldn't do follow-up investigations on pollution, for example.
There'll always be a limit to the total number of investigations we could conduct at any one time.
Yeah.
We have an investigations team of a certain amount. We can expand it by a certain amount. And of course that team will work in investigations in England as well as in Northern Ireland. So there's a necessary limit. Yes. We will prioritise according to how serious the issue is and the difference that we at the OP could make as opposed to anyone else. In theory, that could mean we'd only be investigating in Northern Ireland, in theory, but there's still a limit.
Okay.
Okay, is that clear?
It's absolutely clear, and the stats show abundantly clearly that you have nowhere near the capacity in terms of staff and investigative resource that the Environment Agency currently has, or an independent agency ideally would have. So that's clear. The piece in your written presentation around contributing to policy, there's mention of engagement on the environmental improvement plan and the much needed nutrient action programme. If we could have a bit more detail on that, I think would be useful. Is your advice being sought from DERA in that regard? Are you offering the advice voluntarily? And is the idea there to secure a better outcome before the policy is launched, quite simply?
Thank you, and we've enjoyed exceptionally good relationships with colleagues in DERA. They have sought our advice quite freely, I think, and we've responded to that and welcomed that. We've had very constructive discussions, deep discussions on the environmental improvement plan draft, for example, which, as you know, started off as an environmental strategy document. So we've been quite clear that it's a start, and of course it could be better, but the main thing is to get the darn thing in now and have something actually, given the pressing nature of these issues. So I think overall we're pretty delighted actually with the relationship so far and the level of engagement and the fact that the department has been actively listening. But I wonder whether those actually closely involved in this would like to comment.
Well, just maybe on the specifics around the advice around the draft environment strategy, and government requested our advice back in September 22, and there was we looked at that closely and gave a number of recommendations. We said it was adequate as an environmental improvement plan, but we did question, had recommendations around the targets. There need to be smarter targets. The prioritisation of the areas were probably not right, the correct balance. And we needed to make sure there was a correct delivery plan. That's something we're kind of re-emphasising at the moment with DARA, that we need a delivery plan in place, and also the monitoring and evaluation needed to be in place. I would echo what Dame Glennis said. We've had very good relationships with DARA. Since that letter, we've actually had we've been invited to a couple of workshops around the monitoring and evaluation framework for the EIP, and just to provide our expertise from England and how that might help them in developing that. So far so good, and we've also provided advice, not requested, but we have provided advice on stuff like the circular economy strategy, and also on the ammonia strategy, and that would have been just at our own initiation. Yeah.
That's good to know, but these arrangements, Donagh, so that we're clear, they're ad hoc rather than formalised. It's as and when your advice is sought,
advice is formalised,
as and when you offer it. It's not a formal process.
The unofficial advice that we provide in terms of circular economy, and that's ad hoc. We choose to do that. The formal advice, there is a process of formal advice. Okay. I'll pass that back to Natalie and Dame Glennis.
Okay.
Yes, please. Yeah.
It is a formal process because it sits under statutory power. So we were formally requested for advice, as the Minister is entitled to do under the legislation, and we formally responded to that advice. It's all been published on our website as well, so you can access that.
Doesn't that happen automatically? It's if the Minister chooses to seek the advice rather than you're automatically
the Minister can choose to ask us for advice on anything to do with the natural environment. On matters of law, we can provide advice unsolicited if we think that's correct to do. We haven't done that here in Northern Ireland because it hasn't been necessary, because we have been asked. We have done that in over the water.
Finally, if you don't mind, if we could refer to your own mission targets and strategic objectives, which also feature in your written report, sustainable environmental improvement, for example, and better environmental law with better implemented, is how it's described. Is there already, or is there likely to be, any measurable targets in relation to that? For example, percentage improvements or percentage-based outcomes type targets, or are they just broad brush objectives? And that's not a criticism. Believe me, if we reach those objectives, that is not, when I say broad brush, it's not a criticism, but I'm keen to know whether there are specific.
We're very keen for you to keep the pressure on as well. Yes, definitely.
We are doing a piece of work to do that. We appreciate these objectives are necessarily quite high level. We've been fully operational in Northern Ireland for about 18 months. So I think we're still a new kid on the block. We're doing a piece of work at the moment to nail down with a bit more precision what measurability looks like. What we really care about is that the environment is improved. But we've talked about we're not a first responder. We're not dealing with operators or individuals or polluters. We're dealing with the government system, and therefore we want to get the balance right between seeing direct improvements in our environment and the levers that we exercise, which are a lot of them are advisory and scrutiny and so on. So it's a piece of work that we're doing. We're still developing it because we want to make sure it's meaningful and we're not counting widgets, which would be unhelpful, I think, for everybody.
So this is about how we will demonstrate success or otherwise. That's the lens that we're looking through, rather than a percentage improvement, which would be difficult for us to get it precisely wrong, basically. But Natalie's right. We don't want to sort of say, well, of 16 recommendations, 6 were taken. It's just a widget. So yeah, we have the work underway, and we're happy to report back to you when we know where we're going with it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a couple of points for clarity, if you don't mind. You did mention that, and forgive me if I got it wrong, the proposal that DARA pay 15%. Is that 15% of your budget?
Yes.
You were suggesting that DAERA pay 15% of your budget? So how does that calculate in terms of population? You cover England and Northern Ireland, but I'm assuming England have something in the region of 50 million people, whereas we have less than 2 million. Surely 15% wouldn't be a fair reflection of...
So I think we would need to send you a note on how we came to that 15%.
That would be interesting.
Certainly we considered population as an indicator, but the environmental issues that we have to deal with and the work that we must do by statute doesn't correlate to population. So, for example, a substantial task of ours is to report annually on progress when you've got an environmental improvement plan. And we will be trying there to assist you, not to just look at what has been done in the last year, but does it matter, and how do the trajectories, if you like, project forward so that where you are going to get to. Now that's equally onerous, really, whether it's in England or in Northern Ireland. It doesn't relate to population. So I don't think we were convinced that a population measure alone was the right way in which to divvy up the money. But let me give you a note of the approach.
Yeah, well, if it's not, maybe you'd let us see what
Yeah.
calculation or how you made that calculation.
Sure.
If that's fair.
And just to be clear, Chair, we've made it as a proposition. You know, we haven't had a response. Yeah.
Not surprised. But anyway,
No?
15% is quite a large proportion. My final query is around, going back to Mobile, apologies, Mobile at Clontarry. The Mills report was 2013, and you're saying that not all the recommendations have been followed through. I do accept that there may be issues around judicial issues in it. But just because there are judicial challenges or that there are people being taken to court, I don't think that prohibits you from investigating what went wrong and why processes weren't followed or why it got to that stage. So broadly, I'm asking you for a follow-up with that, because this is a massive issue, and in your own words, I think was one of the biggest United Kingdom environmental disasters. So I would like a follow-up with that, if that's fair.
Do you mean a follow-up note, or do you want us to do?
I would like you to explain why you're not investigating that at the moment, whether it's finances or whether it's, and what's the prohibitives of not investigating it.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there anything further you want to say about that now, Nat, or do you want to do it by note? I mean, I think we've covered the ground, but.
Yeah, no, I've brought it straight on to you, so I'm not expecting,
no, I'm happy to come back
here, but
on it, yes.
I do think it's one that we would like a follow-up.
I'm absolutely no problem with that. I understand it's a very significant issue, and you want to be satisfied that we, amongst others, are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you all very much for your presentation. It's been very interesting, and I'm sure over the coming months we'll be in regular contact about various issues.
We'll be very happy to come back whenever you wish. Always welcome a chance to speak with the Select Committee and its members. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, members, we will suspend for 2 minutes.
Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 21. Sound.
Okay. Okay, the next briefing, final one of today, is from the Ulster Farmers Union. So I welcome William Irvin, Deputy President, Wesley Aston, Chief Executive, and James McCluggage, Policy, Technical and Communications Manager. I refer members to pages 150 to 268 in your pack. So, members, over to you, William, if you want to kick off.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for this opportunity to be here today. At the outset, let me apologise for President David Brown. He's at a family funeral today, and my fellow Deputy Presidents out of the country. But I'm here with Wesley Aston, our Chief Executive, and James McCluggage, our Policy Manager. So, just at the outset, I'd like to acknowledge the level of MLA support at our Farm Family Day held in this building recently, where we launched our Farm Family Manifesto, and we also provided the committee with a list of our 10 key concerns at present. But just before I move on into talk about them, I'll ask Wesley to give a very brief overview of our organisation and what we're about.
Okay, just since this is the first opportunity to talk to this group, just outline the EFU in terms of structure. Democratic organisation have about 12,000 family farm members, 25 geographical groups across Northern Ireland, 16 policy committees, an overarching executive committee that takes the policy decisions within the structure. We have close links with our colleagues in England, Scotland, Wales and indeed the Republic of Ireland. We have an office which we share with them in Brussels, and at headquarters level we have a policy team, a technical team, a communications team and a membership team of about 30 people. So we're a fairly sizable organisation, but we're democratic to the extreme, I suppose, is what we're saying, and really we do a lot of discussion amongst our members about any policy decisions that come in our direction. So that's a broad overview of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wesley. This morning, in this sort of brief few minutes that we have before the questions, I'd like to touch on 3 of our main concerns. What previously sent you the list of 10, but sort of going to concentrate on the 3 at the top of that list. And the first one is future farm support, and there's big questions around what money will come from Westminster in a new mandate, and if we require significant funding for our industry to help roll out our future farm support scheme. That future farm support scheme has been it's went through a co-design process with our department. Ourselves and all other stakeholders had input into it, and that we were really welcomed that opportunity. It's all about meeting our climate targets and up to 2027, and so it needs properly funded, and our industry needs that continued support. The second one on the list is ammonia, and ammonia is a particularly difficult one for us, but we have big concerns as to how the ammonia debate is progressing. Northern Ireland Environment Agency have in our view, have not properly considered the responses to their call for evidence. The evidence on the ammonia operational protocol and all of that debate, we don't consider that there was proper stakeholder engagement. We in the UFU brought together industry stakeholders and industry experts to come to a view and responded from that group. It was much wider than ourselves. And we wanted and expected further discussions with Environment Agency and offered that to bring those experts in front of them so that that discussion could take place. That did not happen, or not happen in any meaningful way. DAERA had previously given a commitment that the executive would have the final say on this, and we are concerned that that's increasingly looking unlikely. We think such a cross-cutting piece of legislation or piece of law as this, affecting such a pivotal industry to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland agriculture is the beginning of that story that moves somewhere above £6 billion through the Northern Ireland economy. So we think it really needs full executive discussion and a full executive decision as to how this all plays out. So, and then the third one is that issue that has been an issue all my life for livestock farms, and that is TB, bovine TB. Currently, as I sit here today, Northern Ireland is at the highest level of TB incidence that it has ever been. And when we compare that to England, it's currently sitting at their lowest level of TB incidence. And the difference is they intervened in the problem areas with the wildlife. The previous executive and the previous minister had brought forward proposals to how to move forward on wildlife intervention. We supported those proposals and it was progressing. We had spent quite a bit of industry money to be ready to deliver on that, but the judicial review went against that process, and it wasn't that judicial review did not consider the pros and cons of intervening with wildlife. It was the process that they did not like. So that fell at that point. And so we're in a limbo land just at the minute as to how we move forward. But there's clear veterinary science evidence and that at our current level of infection, we need a significant intervention. We're currently north of 10% of herds with TB issues. When you're down at the 2 to 3% level, there's more options short of the wildlife intervention. But where we are at, those lesser interventions will have no effect. So that's a very brief overview of the three main issues, and we're happy to take questions on those issues or wherever else you want to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a couple from myself first. William, obviously you're very aware of the issue in Lough Neagh and the difficulties. Have the agricultural sector any plans to assist, help mitigate?
Absolutely, and well, in fact, we're ahead of the game on that. The problem, one of the big issues about Lough Neagh is that it's a historic issue and a long-term issue that it's going to be difficult to get quick fixes around this. But Northern Ireland as a whole has been operating under a nitrates vulnerable zone regulations from 2007. The underlying problem in Lough Neagh is the phosphates that have been laid down over decades, and the combination of the water clearing because of that invasive species of zebra mussels and the sunshine, it has sort of brought it to a head at the current time. I'm going to let James comment on it.
Yeah, look, as the President said there, look, I mean, that's very much a historic issue. You probably go back to the 1700s when there was forests cleared, etc. You know, you've got since 2000, phosphorus levels were high. The year 2000, phosphorus level high in Lough Neagh. But looking forward, as you said, we obviously have the soil nutrient health scheme, which is out there, which is currently zone 2 has just been completed. We're going to head on to zone 3. Initiatives like that, certainly which educate farmers on what can be done. You only have to take a look at what farmers have invested in terms of low emission spreading in Northern Ireland over the years in terms and have availed of the Farm Business Improvement Scheme. As an organisation ourselves, we're currently looking at, now this hasn't been signed off yet, but we're looking at actually employing water quality officers who would go out on farms and educate farmers on what they can do. But you know, so we're playing our part, but we need other parts of industry out there, because we're well aware that it's not farmers who are just the problem of what's happening in Lough Neagh. There's other industries, there's homeowners, septic tanks, etc., which are all leading to that problem as well. We're willing to be part of that. We're part of that discussion, but that's kind of an example of what we're doing as farmers to help.
Is there any broad-based grouping? Sorry, just before is there any broad-based grouping at the moment working on that brings in yourselves, the NIEA, the NI Water, I should say, and other organisations that potentially could be not only a problem with it but a resolution to it?
There may have been loose meetings in the past of those groupings, but nothing structured or formalised. And certainly it is an issue that we raised when we first met the new DAERA Minister fairly recently, that we do need to have that collaborative approach across government agencies, industry, environmental groupings to address the Lough Neagh problem.
Okay.
Sorry, if I could just add, in relation to the Lough Neagh issue, the Deputy President rightly outlined the whole issue about phosphates. I think one of the things that we're looking at in terms of trying to address that is we need to look at how we move on small scale renewables as well. I think you have to look at the two hand in hand. You can't look at one without the other. And how we address energy supply and energy security in Northern Ireland, while at the same time dealing with the nutrient issue around Lough Neagh. I think that's something that we can look at through renewable energy, and we're very keen to progress that. And we need a joined up government approach across DAERA, the Department of the Economy and others to address that going forward.
Okay. A question I asked a group that was here before you is about Northern Ireland Environment Link. Can intensive farming and the environment work hand in hand? Be all
Absolutely.
Part of the one process in Northern Ireland?
And to follow, it sort of follows on from Wesley's comments there. You know, the technologies currently available to take slurry off farms, separate it, make electricity or gas, and remove the phosphates. And you know that's a win-win for everybody. But as our chief executive has said, that requires a planning process that allows these guys to develop, and it requires a financial encouragement to deliver. But you know, the science is there. Everybody knows what could happen and what should happen, but there's a bit of freeing up needs done to allow it to happen.
I'll just come in there. Look, I mean, look after the Next Generation programme within the Ulster Farmers Union, and be chatting to a lot of our younger members. The amount of potential that is there for young farmers who want to get involved in renewable technologies there is massive potential. They want to get going.
The older ones too, maybe?
Yeah, well.
Second time you said that, Tom.
You know, there's serious potential there, but there's no ability to get connection to grid, planning, etc. So there's a real handbrake on there at the moment, and by people adopting those things, it helps. It's a part of a whole circular economy.
Sorry, if I get out as well. I think the whole issue around future agricultural support, the direction of travel over the period up to 2027 is primarily around production efficiencies, not increasing production output. It's about production efficiencies and how we improve that, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but at the same time actually produce the same volume of product that we effectively do at the minute. So there's lots of stuff coming through in that co-design process that the Deputy President mentioned that we are rolling out over the next period of time. And there's genetic schemes, there's soil schemes, there's carbon footprinting. There's all very focused elements in there to address that going forward.
And that carbon footprinting, you know, it's the ultimate exercise in measuring to manage. You know, there's people making assumptions about what our carbon is at the minute, but this will actually give us hard data.
One final quick question from me. Bovine TB, what's the Farmers Union solution to it?
We in the worst areas, we would like to roll out a wildlife intervention. There's a cycle of infection and reinfection between the wildlife and the livestock. We have to break that cycle. We have no vendetta against wildlife, but it has taken a huge toll on the Exchequer. It's taken a huge toll on Northern Ireland agriculture, and that cycle has to be broken.
We can't continue to do what we've done and expect different outcomes.
Okay, thanks. Declan.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation as well. See in relation to the future support funding, and you will be very aware that, you know, in the past that we would have in the separate ring fence budget for the single farm payment pillar 1. Have you any assessment at all from any of your engagements with Westminster that there's a possibility that there's either the Labour administration or whatever happens after the next election will continue that separate ring-fenced fund for farm support?
We attended the National Farmers Union conference in Birmingham at the beginning of this year, and Rishi Sunak spoke at it, the Prime Minister, and the Secretary of State for Agriculture and the Shadow Secretary of State for Agriculture spoke at it. And we come away with no clear view on what way funding was going to look in the future. The current funding north of 300 million, that goes out in the single farm payment. Like, that's been in place quite a few years, and actually, you know, even to keep up with inflation, it would need to be more. Labour have said they view agricultural support as being leaner and greener in the future. That will be a challenge to ourselves. James?
Just analysis that we have done internally in the organisation. If you take the rate of inflation alone, that 300 odd million which comes into Northern Ireland is now close to 400 million when you take what inflation has ate into that over the past few years. So obviously we'd be looking to increase the budget in the future to cover rate of inflation alone.
Yeah, and just related to that last point, James, I think it's also important to point out that there is no Pillar 2, so any future schemes that would have been previously coming out of a separate Pillar 2 budget will be modulated out of the single pot now. And that brings me to another question that I asked previously there. And this is something that certainly we reflected in our response to our party reflected in response to the consultation. In the new policy coming forward, the Farming for Nature, there's no upper limit on that there. It's going to be funded out of the same pot, but it'll be open to all landowners. And, you know, I expressed a fear earlier whenever the NIEL was here, you know, that could potentially undermine our food production capacity. You know, I'm not trying to pit environment against food production here. That's not the case. But I just would be concerned that there'd be a temptation that land managers and landowners could just uptake that there, and that could compromise or have an impact on our food production ability. And yes, we're at the function the other night in Belfast of the Northern Food and Drinks Awards, and we can see how fantastic this is as a region for food producing, and we got the PGA status there recently as well. So what's your thoughts on that particular aspect of the policy, and do you think it needs to be amended, and if so, how?
We would have some of those same concerns, and the new future agricultural support is there's a low level sustainability payment. Now a figure has not been put on that yet, but ultimately it's less about supporting productive agriculture, and that new future support is more about driving change to be more efficient and by more efficient, we mean more carbon efficient, more environmentally efficient. So there's a sea change there. Wesley, do you want to come in
as I
on that?
mentioned earlier, Declan, I think those other schemes around carbon and soils and even ruminant livestock genetics, there's extra funding at the minute that's coming into those, and there's somewhere there's about 75 million already. That's for the next sort of 4 or 5 year period. But those things are longer term, you need to continue those. So again, it goes back to James's figure. The standalone with the direct support of 300, you need 400, and then on top of that you have these other schemes that we now have operative, which will need further funding. So I think there are funding issues there, but the returns in terms of continued food production efficiencies, environmental gains, particularly around climate change, and I'll just flag up the Just Transition Fund as part of the Climate Change Act. Nobody's talking to us about that, and we're very clear it has to be additional funding, can't be taken out of the existing pot of agriculture funding.
If that transitional money comes out of our budget, it'll be the most unjust transitional fund ever.
We would agree, there's a potential there of that pot of money for the farming nature to end up, a large amount of money going to a small number of landowners.
Or Patsy, sorry.
Thanks very much, Chair. Good to see you. Could I maybe just, we'll start with Lough Neagh and then we'll work our way across from, because it's near and dear to my heart, and also represent a good stretch of the western shore of it there as well. There's no disputing that there's a problem there. There's no disputing that agriculture, along with other sectors, has had an input to that down over the years. Now, what I wanted to find out was, in regard to the solutions around this, and I'm hearing you, Wesley, around those renewables, and there has to be another way of getting rid of that slurry, and doing it in a more effective, efficient way. So, but could I just establish the department is working up? The last count I had was back in December when they had 113 recommendations. Is the department liaison or consulting with yourselves as one of the key stakeholders associated with resolution plan or a projected resolution plan for Lough Neagh? Has there been any consultation done with yourselves around that?
Nothing directly. We did, as I said earlier, it was raised with the new DAERA Minister, and certainly we are willing and stand ready to be involved in something going forward.
You mentioned not directly. What does that mean, Wesley?
It just means we're not aware of any formal structures, but no formal approach.
No, there hasn't been any approach directly to us around that.
Sorry, not that I'm aware of.
All right, okay. Now, I think maybe, Chair, that would be very, very important indeed, given the role that you play. Now, can I just maybe ask, there's a document there that I've seen, and it puzzles me a bit. It's maybe just I'm having a slow day, but it's in relation to, it's page 177 of our documents, that as a result of representations from the industry, 28 ammonia monitoring stations were established in 2019 to help measure and understand the impact of ammonia emissions. But only 3 of those monitoring sites are measuring ammonia. I'm not quite sure, maybe that's written wrongly or something. It seems rather odd to me that you set up 28 monitoring stations and only to monitor ammonia, and only 3 of them are measuring.
My understanding was that the original, at the start of this climate change discussion and debate, that Northern Ireland had 3 stations measuring ammonia.
Yes.
We lobbied hard that was too. That was not an accurate way to measure ammonia, and we were told there was 28. To answer your direct question, I don't know the answer.
You can get back to me, or maybe it's for the department to get back, because it seems kind of odd that you set up.
I think it's actually a department.
And it's only 3 of them. Yes, thank you. Now, to get back to the TB issue, looking at that, I read or tried to read through the scientific report last night, and quite bits of it were heavily qualified and backwards and forwards and all of that. But 53 million being spent to try and stem or hold off. It's a wee bit like the finger in the dike. It seems to be ever increasing this, and there's a major problem out there. Now, this qualified report seems to eventually come to the conclusion that one aspect of it would be the wildlife interventions. Are you saying wildlife intervention, i.e. cull, or look at the range of interventions like what there has been inoculation or whatever that has been experimented on in other jurisdictions?
The veterinary advice, the scientific veterinary advice that we get is that at our level of the disease currently, those vaccinations or those lesser interventions will not have any significant impact. Badgers are a protected species, but they're not an endangered species. And we are getting, as anecdotal evidence, but like all our members say, goodness, that we never had as many badgers. And they are, as I say, we have no vendetta against badgers, but we absolutely hate this disease of bovine TB.
No, anybody would.
And they are part of that cycle. And when we look at what whenever the previous minister and the department come forward with these proposals, we went over to England, a group of us, to go onto farms and see how this actually played out, because we sort of struggled with it a bit too, what was being proposed, but the results were clear to see within 2 years. Guys that were on regular 4-monthly testing down to annual testing, and it was quite revealing to me. Every farmer we talked to, we went round maybe 8 farms, but there was a lot of farmers brought into each of those 8 farms, so we engaged with maybe 40, 50 farmers. Every one of them said 18 months or 2 years into the wildlife intervention, they started to see more hedgehogs, more ground nesting birds, brown hares, and the bumblebees are also. And those are all, the badger is no natural predator, but it is a predator to all those other animals. And the hedgehogs actually are an endangered species. So, there's our issue around bovine TB, but there's a wider wildlife issue out there. And it's like, there's never an argument that's clear cut, but this is a bigger argument than just...
Just one final way, you probably know this, or if you don't, it'll be for the department. Are there particular hotspots at the minute?
Absolutely, yeah. But the role I'm in now, I'm talking to farmers from right round the province, and every one of them says, but our area is bad. But the level is bad all over. But I think Fermanagh is actually the worst at the minute that came out recently. So, within an overall bad picture, there's still hot spots.
This was sort of come back, and there were experts there who almost held Dara Veterinary Department to account, and it was the TBEP group, the TB Eradication Partnership, which was supposed to effectively say disbanded at the end of the year. And we would really encourage that group is reinstated, because they done all that work. They were the expert. You've got science, you've got veterinary within that, and they looked at it, and they had all that. They had all the homework done, and finished, gone from the start of the year.
All right, Patsy.
Sure. Would it be a helpful proposal just to, on that point that James has just made, that the establishment or re-establishment of that group be looked at again by the department?
Okay, are you proposing that we write to the department to ask if they'll consider that? Is that?
Please.
Are we agreed?
Sorry, what are we in detail asking them to consider?
You can explain it, Patsy, if you want, but my understanding is that this committee write to the department to ask them if they are considering the re-establishment of that expert group. I can't remember what you call it.
Okay, yep.
Is that okay? All right, great. Thank you.
We would welcome that.
And could we ask as well if the expert group included any wildlife organisations or environment organisations?
Maybe what we should do is ask for a list of who was
all
on
of
the
the
group.
organisations.
I can answer that one. For it had an environmentalist on it.
Well, I think we'll ask officially if that's all right.
Okay.
Michelle.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for presenting today, but also for the briefing which you've provided, which is incredibly extensive. And I suppose the discussions that we're having today at the moment really don't reflect the amount of work that has gone into what has been provided to us. So thank you very much for that. And I suppose, Chair, in relation to that, I suppose there are huge issues which we're discussing here today, which are probably fundamental to this committee, and no doubt we'll return to them again and again. And I'm guessing that we will have the UFU before us in order to talk about those issues in greater depth, because I don't think that they're getting justice here today. Hence, my questions are probably going to be just very, very general. Under the briefing that you provided with regards to climate change and the environment, there's a key line in that where you say the industry must not be decimated by poor policy and legislative decisions. I suppose that could be applied across a number of things that we're even discussing today with regards to TB and ammonia, as well as climate change itself. There has been some discussion with regards to forced livestock cuts and the impact that that would then have on industry. Could you maybe talk to the committee in relation to that and what you're seeing from other countries and the impact that that may have?
Well, just on your first point, if I may, the process that has led to the future agricultural support system was a process of co-design, and that doesn't mean we don't, as an industry, don't find the outcome quite challenging, but it's better because we and other stakeholders were around the table debating all these issues, and that's what I feel is so lacking in the climate change and ammonia discussion. That is not happening to that extent, and we feel that is a failure of process, actually. And on that too, you know, such a significant, something of such significant impact on our industry, you know, if this goes through without full executive, it should have a quality assessment. It should have rural impact assessment, and it should have economic assessment. And at the minute, we are not aware of any of that being in process. So the second part of the question,
the rollout of the measures that the Deputy President's mentioned in terms of future agricultural support, that's to deliver a 12.5% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2027. So in theory, we can meet that with all the measures that we will roll out over that period of time. Beyond that, we're not looking to see just where we're going at this stage, because there could be huge changes in technology which could actually allow us to look at that. But I think fundamentally, if we don't do something in terms of beyond 2027, then by 2030, according to the Climate Change Commission, it looks as though we're going to have to reduce our livestock numbers across every sector, including pigs, poultry, dairying, sheep, the whole lot, by up to 20%. Now, that's very significant, but that's if we don't do something. So what we're looking at is to try and reach that 2027 target, that 12.5%, on the basis of introducing these measures. But we do think beyond that, we probably need a fundamental review of just where we are stock take, about where we are in relation to climate change at that particular point in time, because the challenges are very, very significant. And you mentioned about other countries. We certainly see what's happening in the south of Ireland. We see what's happening with our colleagues in Wales, about 10% for planting trees, 10% of land for biodiversity, and you know what that means for food production and impact on farm livelihoods. We're looking at it very differently here in Northern Ireland about production efficiencies, but taking it in bite-sized chunks, if you like, and that's what we feel we can achieve in around up to 2027. But it is hugely challenging, as the Deputy President already said.
And the Northern Ireland's current climate bill went far beyond what the Climate Change Committee's recommendations were, and again, that because that was a private member's bill, full economic and full wider assessments were not done around any of that, and it's dawning on people now actually the full impact of what that might be.
And so I suppose your assessment sort of across industry and farm businesses, do they understand fully the implications of what's coming down the road?
I would say there's a significant portion of our members that busy trying to make ends meet and do their daily farming that they're not fully aware of the power.
It's one thing I can say is there's a huge communication piece needed being done by DAERA here at the minute of what's coming down the track, and not leave it to almost other stakeholders to get that message out there.
DAERA have formed, along with industry, a carbon farming partnership, and now the Minister is in place
We understand that things can start to move. Up until now, we had been waiting on ministerial approval for various measures, but communications is a big issue going forward for us all, because these are the measures for future direct support already starting to roll out, and we're getting questioned as to why are we doing this. So that bigger message has to come out.
And one thing I can see, and it's you know, to get your head around, there's now new terminology, there's new acronyms, and it's all new language for us all, and it's that communication piece of what these new acronyms mean. So it's a bit of work.
Strategies. Yeah. Sorry, Michelle, even. Sorry.
To the TB consultation, obviously you were welcoming yesterday the huge response, and obviously we're going to have to wait for the outcome of that, and as to whether or not what's been suggested may be implemented or not. But I suppose the issue around compensation is obviously one which has been quite controversial over a long period of time. I suppose setting it against what is a very sort of limited budget, and sort of the justification for the reduction in compensation is then seen as, in many respects, as a revenue raising tactic at this point, particularly by the Secretary of State when we were in suspension. I suppose I want your view on the term compensation, because obviously my understanding of that is perhaps different to what's being told, because obviously the impact on farmers who have had herds decimated by TB, but I suppose it would be useful to have it here from yourself.
I welcome that question. We consider what's happening at the minute not to be compensation. It's livestock valuation, and it's the value of the particular livestock on the day they were removed from the farm. Compensation to me means compensation for reduced income and a business impact and all of that. None of that happens. It's been mentioned previously, 53 plus million probably cost the Exchequer. We were in the process of actually getting a proper report done, but we are convinced that the on-farm cost is more than 53 million. That dairy farmer whose milk check is gone, that suckler guy who is keeping cattle, that he has to rent houses, has to buy in extra feed. A lot of those suckler guys have one income payday in the year. That has denied them. The financial pressure that puts farm businesses under is unimaginable. And then you have the whole emotional side of guys watching their life's work going in such a manner. I've said it at many meetings, on 3 occasions I have seen guys, farmers my age, in tears, and it has always been due to their frustration and the mental impact of TB.
I would say on the cutting of the TV compensation, this is actually something that wildlife groupings actually agree with the UFU on, that it's punitive, it's counterproductive actually to cut the TB compensation rate. So we have support from wildlife groupings on that.
I've never seen anything to unite our membership like that. They just, the proposal, they take it as an insult. There's a few within there have suggested actually are getting very well paid here, and but it's wrecking our farm businesses, and our guys, it boils their blood whenever they hear that.
And just quickly, can I just ask about the voluntary levy that you have for the intervention, and what that looked like and what that was proposing to do?
That was 0.02 pence per litre of milk, and a pound a head per animal they slaughtered, and that was in industries. That was their method of funding the wildlife intervention, and I'm really proud of our industry. It stepped up to the mark. It shows they want to address this problem. It shows they're not coasting on the back of this so-called compensation. They wanted to intervene and break this cycle of infection and reinfection.
And just to reinforce what the Deputy President said, to see the industry coming together and being prepared to fund that themselves clearly shows the commitment to try and address TB and the need to do so.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. John.
Thank you. I decided there to pick up where we were leaving off. Thanks to Michelle, whether it was the TB intervention or climate stroke environment. So we'll stay on the theme of the TB wildlife intervention. Before I do that, I'll welcome back the representatives of the EFU. It's good to see them at committee again. Can I ask, if you don't mind, the investment you mentioned for the proposals that were originally brought forward by the department on bovine TB, was that investment directly on policy or the development of policy or practicalities around intervention, or was that investment based on the fact that the proposal from the department was actually farmer-led companies? And is that what the investment was geared at, the fact that you expected companies to be created that were farmer-led?
In England, there was countless companies set up on different areas. When we looked at what was being proposed for Northern Ireland, we decided we weren't big enough to do that. We were just going to have one. Northern Ireland was one region. We didn't go down the formal company route. What the money was actually being used for, we have there's quite a strictly supervised process around wildlife intervention. It required people being trained and actually proven that they were of sufficiently able to hit the targets. So there was intensive training. These guys were out at night at the distances that are being involved, shooting polystyrene shaped badgers, and if they couldn't do it, they were shooting the door. So there was quite a process there. There's a whole legal process to allow that to happen, and that's where that money. There's an NFU person in England that trained all the English folks and was the knowledge around all that. We brought her over for a period of months. So we wanted, if it had been allowed to happen last autumn, we had spent the money, our industry had spent the money, and we were ready to go in a very controlled, supervised and a professional manner, but we weren't allowed the opportunity.
No, I'm not, and I hope you know, I will even be in any way critical of what the preparation might have been. I'm trying to clarify in my mind what the investment was for, and I can fully understand that it would have been preparation for the proposal for farmer-led companies, and I think that was the phrase used by the department. If we could move on to some of the facts and figures presented on bovine TB more generally, and comparisons that are often made. Is it not the case that we sometimes, even from the department, fall into the trap of making unfair or indirect comparisons? Like, for example, if we're comparing with the fact that there is a cull in the Republic of Ireland, the facts are surely that in the Republic of Ireland, the instances of bovine TB had fallen by 25% due to policy changes before any cull was introduced in 2004. And there are figures there that show that. Isn't that the case?
We would see the most significant impact is when the cycle of infection, reinfection with the wildlife is done. There is other things there, but nothing makes the single most impact that the wildlife breaking that cycle.
This goes back to my point of Tibet. We could be accused of, you will say that because you're the UFU, the Ulster Farmers Union.
Say that,
no, but I'm just saying.
I didn't say that.
But this is where the need of Tibet, the experts who are looking at this, they're cross-cutting. They're representing various different, as I said, veterinary environment, etc. But they're scientific there, so they're looking at it, and they were almost advising. They were advising us. So the experts are telling us, and that's why. They're seen as an independent group that are almost marking the homework, as I would describe, and why there's no better need or no greater need to get that grouping back up and running again, as the independent people there to consult with.
I'm trying to sort of broaden the comparison thing, and I hope you all understand my reasons. There were other factors that came into play in the early 2000s. foot and mouth, for example, in Northern Ireland impacted statistics and outcomes on this side of the border, and in the Republic of Ireland, as I understand it, there were significant policy changes that created a fall of quite a percentage before any cull was introduced. If I could move on to... Sorry, William, go ahead.
Just before we move on from it, our current level of TB is beyond what any of the other areas I ever have got to. So we're starting in a worse place. And that's a significant point of what we'll have to do now. Yep.
You will know that from my position perspective, currently we're dealing with limited policy and none of the interventions that were proposed by the department a year or two ago. So there's a huge void there, and I agree with you on that. If we could move to the environment, Lough Neagh, and I realise that efforts have been made, I would be grateful, and I'm not, I repeat, not doing this as a challenge, but it would be helpful to me if I could be given any indication of additional resources that were directed at the Lough Neagh problem after the crisis came to light last year. You'll understand that, like Patsy, whose constituency borders the Lough, I stood with constituents who live and trade there, and they were utterly devastated by the outcome. And I'm wondering, have there been specific measures introduced or undertaken as a direct result of what happened at Lough Neagh last year?
I don't think there have been.
As we said earlier, John, in response to some of the other questions, we're not aware of anything formalised. Certainly there may have been individual measures, but it's nothing that we as UFU were involved in.
Okay, so
but we are trying to get this initiated and moved on, and the meeting with the Minister would start in that process.
Yeah, but UFU itself hasn't at this stage introduced any sort of localised programme.
Well, actually, we'll have proposals on the table that require funding, but we would like to put river quality, water quality officers on the ground in an advisory capacity, and we think that would be a game changer, because the Environment Agency, whenever they arrive with their legislative outlook on things, and it's a breach here or you broke a law here, but we think there would be more to be gained by advice, and we're getting a lot of support on this initiative. That has not just played out as hard cash yet, but we're hopeful.
Yeah, and it needs to be funded, to be able to do it.
Well, William, thank you, because my next question was on your mention earlier of water quality advisors. I've said previously, said it earlier today, and I'm not going to apologise for saying it again, for the reasons I've highlighted. I stood there with people who live and trade, and you will have members who conduct their livelihood on the shores of the Lough, and I understand that. But I'm going to ask a question for a very specific reason, which is this. Surely it's the case that there isn't a red tractor badge or a food accreditation in existence which could compensate or override in any way the product from the place that has poisoned its waterways and killed off its native species. So that leads to the question, which is that, is it not the case that every single practice in every sector and every policy should be urgently reviewed as a result of what happened at Lough Neagh last year, and that all of us will have adjustments to make?
I firmly believe that wider society have not sort of realised that this is everybody's problem, and I would have serious doubts as to the efficiency of a lot of private septic tanks, of a serious within agriculture we are trying to initiate mitigations, but I don't think there's any village or small town within Northern Ireland. They've all expanded beyond their wastewater treatment plants.
Yep.
And so I'm not putting the blame all on them. We're in there too, but it's the whole round.
And I think it goes back to the future direction of agricultural support. It's not just about greenhouse gas emissions. It's about how we deal with phosphates and all those other bits and pieces. And renewable energy is a big part of that. So it's a holistic approach. But we are ready to play our part.
as the current situation is affecting the fishing on the loch and other recreation and other things. So it is an intersectoral response that is required. Okay, thank you.
All right, John. Patsy, 1 to 2 seconds.
It's just the only thing was now, James, you mentioned there about changing in acronyms and that. Now, we heard earlier about the lack of comms from the department, and I'm hearing that, and I'm also a bit disappointed there hasn't been anybody consulting with yourselves around proposals on Loch Ness. But surely there's somebody at the end of a phone to explain what an acronym means. If there isn't, we're in an even worse situation. So you're the man that said it.
For the guys within NIA department and ourselves that are having these discussions day and daily, you know, these acronyms, you sort of, even for a slow learner like me, you eventually take them on board. But the guys that just encounter them for the first time, it's like double Dutch.
I'm not trying to defend, government or indeed ourselves, but there's a lot of change happening.
Yes.
And change leads to all these things being developed. We're only in the process of developing new schemes, so there will be a lot of acronyms. But the whole communications piece, as Michelle has asked earlier, that's critical for us all to try and get that strategic message out there. And then over a period of time, make sure that we bring everybody with us, and that'll take a resource and effort to do it.
And,
all right. Finally, William.
Well, just agriculture as a whole sort of feels that we are being portrayed in some quarters as the bad guy here. But the way the population has grown over this last 40 years and that demand for a plentiful supply of cheap food, everybody advising us and our own industry, we fulfil those obligations. And that's what society wanted. So, we're in a place where society has guided us and required us to be, and all of a sudden we're being told, well, you're in the wrong place. How bad are you that you're here? But it's bigger than agriculture. It's where society's at.
Okay, William, Wesley and James, thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you quite a bit over the next months. We appreciate your presentation and look forward to having further discussions.
Thank you, and we're always ready to engage.
Thank you. Okay, members, we will quickly move on to the item of correspondence. I'm going to run quickly through this and just highlight the issues that I think. If there are any others that you have, please bring them forward. Correspondence in your pack, pages 278 to 279 from Lord J, Chair of the European Affairs Subcommittee on the Windsor Framework, to Lord Douglas Miller regarding animal health and welfare, regarding the Animal Welfare Livestock Exports Bill. The correspondence there, 276, 277, and an explanation as to why it didn't extend to Northern Ireland. So I think that's fine. However, I'm hearing that there is also an EU consultation at the moment on livestock movements, so it might be useful to ask DERA for an update on that if you're all agreed. Okay. Just so that we get a handle on that. Okay. Members, in your correspondence at page 284 of your pack, the Clerk of the Committee for Finance also copied to the Clerks of Justice and Infrastructure Committees regarding Victoria Square residents. You will recall that this committee has written to the Assembly Legal Services regarding the matter and will copy the letter to Minister Muir. Also, the matter has moved on after our meeting, and relevant ministers are meeting to progress the issue, so hopefully that can be progressed. Are you content to note currently the correspondence and wait for the Assembly's Legal Services response? Happy enough? Okay, correspondence at page 285 from Mr. Cormac Dolan, Manager of Nature Friendly Farming Network. You content to note and add them to potential, or the organisation to potential list of briefings? Yep. Agreed. Okay. Correspondence at pages 286, 288 of your pack from the Clerk of the Committee for Economy. At its meeting of the committee, considered evidence from Renewable NI relating to a target in the Climate Change Act 2022 of generating 80% of electricity from renewables. Again, it's obviously highlighting the response or the issue of planning delays to the department. Committee had agreed to write to DAERA seeking clarity as to whether the claims made in respect of planning delays were accurate, and agreed to copy the letter to this committee. Are you happy with that for now? Okay, members, your table papers at pages 13 to 14 is from the Clerk of the Windsor Framework DSC dated 19th of March. At its meeting on the 14th of March, it took evidence from the British Dental Association regarding its concerns over amendments to the EU regulation on mercury, and this is in relation to amalgam fillings, which falls under DAERA's remit. If applied to Northern Ireland, BDA are concerned regarding the implications of the associated ban. Are you content to note, or do you want us to write to the department seeking of a derogation or suitable alternatives? I think we should write to the department anyway. Is that fair? Agreed?
Yep. Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item sorry, was there any other matters or in correspondence that I passed over there that anybody wants to bring to our attention? I brought what I thought was relevant. Okay. Agenda item 9, draft forward work programme. The team have now collated a list of potential briefings and visits that the committee have agreed to over the past number of weeks, and will consider at the forward work programme after Easter, and we can consider that further. At our first meeting after Easter on Thursday the 11th of April, we have a pre-briefing from research in relation to our strategic planning meetings, and also have a briefing confirmed for the Competition and Markets Authority for that date. You content? Any other business? Sorry, Declan?
No.
Oh, sorry, content. Any other business? Declan?
Chair, just briefly, the coal mine inquiry is starting now. There was a pre-inquiry meeting of it yesterday, and Nicola Rogan was at, and DAERA will be stakeholder in that inquiry. I wonder would it be appropriate just to ask for a bit of an update from DAERA about their approach to that, or the preparations for it. That be?
I'm happy enough.
Okay.
Members okay with that?
Enough.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Any other business? Okay, members, next meeting is Thursday the 11th of April, 10 o'clock in this room. I wish you all a happy Easter.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair.